There are all kinds of mistakes. Some are forgiven, some are forgotten. Some are borne by others, and some you pay for all the days of your life. These mistakes dog you relentless, even in your dreams. I've made mistakes in my lifetime, and I paid dearly for them. My name is Patricia. I am 19 years old, and I don't think I'm arrogant. I do think that I'm the most beautiful girl in my neighborhood. I live with my parents and twin brothers. Many boys in the neighborhood want to date me. My mom always encouraged me to think independently and to ignore other people's opinions. She told me to do whatever I wanted. Father was quite the opposite. He was always admonishing me to watch my behavior and behave myself, but I preferred my mother's advice, to be free and act on my own. My friends were like me. We were carefree and impulsive. We made bets about boys and love. We would flirt with boys and choose our victims and then cheat on them at the end to turn the tables on them. Playing frivolously with people's feelings was a bad thing, but I enjoyed it in a cruel sort of way. It thrilled and empowered me. But things changed when a guy named Jack saved my life one day. I was walking down the street alone while listening to music when a speeding car almost ran me down because I wasn't paying attention to where I was walking. Jack appeared from nowhere and pulled me out of harm's way and rescued me. He asked me if I was okay, and I said I was. He offered to drive me home, and I accepted. We didn't say a word during the drive. When we arrived home, I wrote my phone number on a piece of paper, along with a note telling him to call me in 2 hours. He did, and we talked until daylight. Jack was handsome, with brown eyes and well-tanned skin. He was a courageous man who protected me and helped me achieve all my dreams while we were together. If anyone annoyed me, I would go to him and he would embrace me in his arms to calm me. I felt safe whenever I was with him. We got engaged, had a small wedding with families and friends, and began enjoying our new life together. But my friends grew jealous of my newfound happiness, and they didn't like Jack. They thought that I deserved a better man. In the beginning, I tried to ignore their sniping at Jack, but I ended up being negatively biased towards Jack and began unintentionally sabotaging our relationship. I accused him of blocking me from achieving my dreams and of not caring about me. He promised me that after his graduation, he would find a job. I didn't believe him and asked to break off our engagement. He begged me not to and cried. But I had made my decision. I was torn between his love and my friend's jealousy and envy. I ended up losing him. Then I met Mark, a funny, blonde, rich guy with a nice car. Many girls wanted to marry him, but I pursued him and beat them all. I sensed that he didn't seem to care as deeply for me as Jack had, and that he didn't care about my safety as much either, but I dismissed my intuition. After all, he bought me anything I desired. So we decided to marry. Still, a little voice in my head kept whispering to me that I was making a big mistake by marrying Mark. After our marriage, we lived in a big villa with a swimming pool and lots of servants. But Mark changed after a while. He became irrational and paranoid. He began controlling everything in my life, even my lifestyle and my behavior. He raged a lot. Finally, I told him that I was fed up with his behavior, and that I didn't like being controlled by him like a dog on a leash. He sneered that he owned me because he gave me all his money to spend. I stopped making love to him, so he began raping me when the mood struck him. This made me miss Jack and his deep love for me. I cried a lot during our now miserable relationship. I was so distraught that I went to see a doctor with one of my friends. After checking me over, the doctor told me that I was pregnant. I was torn between joy and sadness. When I told Mark about my pregnancy and situation, he told me that we were still young and that I should abort the baby. And he threatened me, said if I didn't get an abortion, then he would do it himself. I furtively collected all my things one night and ran away to another state. I didn't know how to start over. I stayed in a motel for a while and worked in a restaurant as a waitress. I agonized a lot during my pregnancy about whether to have the baby or not. I had a kind colleague named Veronica, and I told her my story. She sympathized with me and asked me to come live with her. One day, I had a strong stomach pain in my 7th month of pregnancy, and she took me to the hospital. I was surprised to find that the birthing assistant was none other than Jack himself. We looked at each other silently for a moment. Then he asked me about my life, and I cried and asked him to help me. I saw the love in his eyes, and he told me that he would do his best to help me and the baby. Before the surgery, I held his arm and asked him to forgive me. He shushed me to be silent and confessed that he still loved me. I cried like a baby. He hugged me and made me feel warm and safe. His loving smile was the last thing I remembered before going under the anesthesia. I woke up in a room full of flowers with my Veronica smiling beside me. Jack knocked on the door and entered with a nurse in tow behind him. She was holding my baby, and they congratulated me for having a beautiful little girl. After that, he visited me every day at the hospital. I told him everything about my miserable life. He offered to let me live with him and promised to take care of me and the baby. I felt that my life was finally on the right track, and that life would forgive all my many mistakes. I even forgot my miserable past. But unfortunately, cruel life was finished with me yet. One day, I received a letter from Mark threatening me, saying that I would pay for running away from him. I immediately told Jack, and he reassured me and told me not to be afraid, that he would protect me with his life. Soon afterwards, my fears came true when the doorbell rang, and Jack opened the door to find Mark pointing a gun at him. Mark said coldly, "Do you imagine that you could take Patricia away from me? You can't." And then he laughed and pointed the gun toward me. I screamed and closed my eyes. When I opened my eyes again, I saw Jack standing in front of me, with blood gushing from his chest. He had told me that he would protect me with his life, and he did. I rushed over to Mark. We struggled. The gun went off, and Mark fell to the floor, dead. I'm sitting in my prison cell. I had lost everything: my life, my love, and ultimately my daughter. Life had exacted a high payment from me for making too many mistakes in my life.
I confess that I love money and fame. People envy me for it, or they did. I've been a prima donna since the day I was born. All girls dreamt of being me. My father helped my brother and I achieve all our dreams. But there was one fly in the ointment, and this is my story. My name is Amelia. I'm 17 years old. My father's a businessman. My mother came from a rich family, so we were quite wealthy, rolling in dough, one might say. My brother Arthur was handsome, older than me. He went to flight school. We lived a good life without a care in the world. We had everything: cell phones, clothes, cars, servants, opportunities to travel the globe. We wanted for nothing. The most important thing was our happiness. And so my story starts at the villa where I lived with my family. My father employed many servants to attend to our every need. Martha was our head servant. She was in her 40s, funny, smart. Arthur and I loved her. Oddly, we didn't view her as a servant because she took such good care of us. Mother didn't seem to like her for some reason and was always mistreating her. Father, however, adored Martha. Once I left my iPod in the garden, and I was going to get it. On my way to the garden, I passed by Father's office, so I decided to go and talk to him. He was at his desk, and Martha was standing next to him, crying. I figured it was because Mother had mistreated her again. Father saw me standing there, and he asked me why I was still awake, and I told him about my iPod. I didn't think much of it at the time. As time passed, Mother and Martha's disputes became more frequent every day. Father wasn't home a lot, but whenever he came home, he would always ask about Martha first. One time, when this happened, I noticed that Mother glared at Father. I couldn't understand why. Father was often away traveling for long periods of time. One of those times, I noticed that Martha was always tired because Mother was making her work very hard. Mother never let her relax. One day, after midnight, I went to Martha's room to check on her, and I was shocked to see that she looked different than I remembered. I asked if she was pregnant, and she said that she was, but that I shouldn't tell anyone, otherwise she'd get fired. I didn't understand why my parents would fire her for being pregnant. A few days later, we received some really horrible news. Father's plane had crashed, and there were no survivors. We were stunned. All of us were crying, but Martha was crying especially hard. Suddenly, Martha fainted, and we took her to the hospital. Our life had changed overnight. After the funeral, Father's lawyer called us about Father's will. He came to our home and met my mother, Arthur, me, and Martha, and 2 other servants. The lawyer began reading the will. He started with Mother's inheritance, then mine, then Arthur's, and then Martha's. He looked at Martha, cleared his throat, and said in a quiet voice, "Martha, the deceased has left you 10 million to raise your child." The lawyer read the last line of Father's will, which said, "Martha's child is mine." We all gasped, but Mother suddenly lost it. Enraged, she attacked Martha as the lawyer pulled Mother away from her. Arthur was holding his head in his hands, and I was shocked. I said to Martha, "How dare you? How dare you do this to us? This is our money. You don't deserve any of it." Then I spoke to the lawyer. "Please tell me this isn't true." He replied helplessly, "Unfortunately, it is." Arthur was glaring at Martha, and he said coldly, "Martha, you are going to die." Martha looked very frightened upon hearing this. That night, the other servants helped Martha sneak out of the house. Arthur came to my room that same night and told me that we had to kill Martha. He said he knew where she was, and that her 10 million belonged to us. At first, I was hesitant to get involved. I mean, that was murder, but in the end, I reluctantly agreed to help him. The next day we made a call and hired a hitman to rid us of that disaster. Later we received a call from him. He said that Martha was no longer a problem. We smirked in victory. A few days later, the lawyer came by again. Before he could tell us why he came, we beheld a miracle. Our recently said to be deceased father was walking behind him with a servant holding a child. Arthur and I stared at him in disbelief and shock. Then we looked at each other. Arthur's face had gone pale white as all the blood drained from his face. Father was livid and said to us in an accusing manner, "The moment you thought I was dead and that I left an inheritance for Martha, you immediately arranged to have her killed. I suspected you'd try something like this. It was pure luck that I got back when I did. I missed my flight that day, otherwise I would have been dead now. So fortunately I came back early enough for Martha to call me and tell me about your death threat. When I arrived at Martha's place, she was already dead, but I called 911, and they were able to save the child. Then I immediately called my lawyer to revise my will, to leave half of my inheritance to this child. I felt like I was in an endless nightmare. The police arrived and told us that the hired killer had been arrested and had confessed and told the police that Arthur and I were the ones who hired him to kill Martha. As the policeman was handcuffing us to take us away, I thought about the irony, how Martha was dead, how her newborn baby had survived and was now the richest child in the country, how Arthur and I were going to jail, and how one small fly in the ointment had caused our ultimate fall from grace.
I don't believe in ghosts, evil spirits, haunted houses, metaphysics, etc. I only believe in science and facts. But sometimes things happen that shred all your beliefs. I want to introduce myself. I'm Lisa. I'm 14 years old. I live with my mom, dad, and grandmother. And they're all very proud of me. I'm the leader of the science club at school, and I've been the perfect student for the past 2 years. My hobbies are reading, watching educational videos, and learning. I like to discuss matters with rational people, not those who believe in myths, aliens, ghosts, and other such nonsense. I personally think these people have mental issues. One morning, my grandmother passed away. I was sad for a long time because I missed her so much. On the day of her funeral, the whole city must have come to say goodbye. While the priests were praying, I noticed something peculiar about one of the graves in the graveyard. After the prayer ended, I approached the grave in question to investigate. There was some weird writing on it. Then, a wispy, transparent, smoky figure appeared out of nowhere. It said to me, "Do not get closer to Donna Median's grave. Beware." I shivered slightly and asked the apparition who Donna was, and it replied. Who was she? She was an evil witch who liked to scare people. She was burned at the stake as a witch, but before her death, she swore a curse that if anyone ever approached her grave, her ghost would haunt that person to the day they die. I did not laugh at the apparition's warning. Instead, I turned and returned home, thinking about what had happened. On a sudden defiant impulse, I decided to visit that grave that night to see for myself if the curse was real. I took my dad's flashlight and wore a raincoat. It was pitch black outside. The place was horribly unsettling at night, but I wasn't worried at all. It's not like it was real, right? I entered the gate to the sound of howling dogs and meowing cats. My blood ran cold, and a sudden chill ran through me. I turned on the flashlight and began searching for the grave. My hands were trembling so badly, I dropped the flashlight several times. Sometimes I would step on something crunchy, and I would shine the light downward, only to see that I had stepped on an insect. Sometimes I'd see a cat here and there. Then suddenly, I heard an eerie sound close by. I froze, not daring to move. Slowly, I pointed my light towards the sound and gasped as my light illuminated a dark, shadowy figure. It was about my height and dressed all in black. I spun around and fled as rapidly as my faithful feet could carry me. I dove into bed, but I didn't sleep at all that night. I even left the lights on. The next day, when I woke up, I asked my dad if graveyards had ghosts, and he wondered why I would ask such a question. I was embarrassed and laughed to hide my fear. I told him that I was just curious. That was all. Dad looked at me suspiciously, but continued. I've heard stories, he said, that some people have seen a ghost of a girl from time to time beside Donna Median's grave. I felt my heart sink, and I asked slowly, "Is she about my height and dressed in black?" He replied, "Yes, that's how I've heard the ghost described." "How in the world did you know that?" I looked down casually and answered, "Oh, I read an article about it on the internet last night." My head hurt just thinking about this ghost thing. I made up my mind to prove or disprove it once and for all. I called my friend Laura and persuaded her to come with me to the grave. The following night, we met at the stroke of midnight at the entrance to the graveyard. Laura was shaking and constantly casting glances right and left. The weather was rainy and gloomy. The ground was muddy, and cats were meowing everywhere. It would have made the perfect setting for a supernatural horror movie. While we were looking for Donna's grave, flying bats would occasionally startle Laura, causing her to scream alarmed. As we approached Donna's grave, we suddenly heard a sound behind us. We both turned around at the same time and screamed. A ghost was glaring at us. It asked angrily, "What are you doing beside my grandmother's grave?" "Wait a minute. Are you girls?" She uncovered her face, revealing that she was just a girl, and a beautiful one at that. She told us that her name was Carmen and asked me to turn off the flashlight because it hurt her eyes. I did. Then I asked, "Who are you?" She replied, "I'm the 5th grandchild of Donna Median, the poor woman in this grave who has been wrongly accused." We both whispered back, "Wrongly accused?" She continued saying, "Yes, she was a victim of the Holocaust during World War II. Afterwards, she became a simple doctor who treated people who were afflicted with epilepsy. As usual, there are always some small-minded, superstitious people looking to make trouble for others. They accused her of being a witch because they considered epilepsy to be a disease caused by a demon's touch. I come here every day to put flowers on her grave. People have mistaken me for a ghost because I only come at night. I don't want people to know I'm related to someone they think to be a witch. I don't want to be shunned, scorned, or gossiped about." I tried to comfort her and calm her a little by saying, "Don't worry, Carmen. Your grandmother's spirit may be able to rest in peace if you tell people the truth now. We live in more modern times, and there's no need to worry. I won't tell anyone about you being the ghost. It'll be our little secret." Carmen laughed. She and I became good friends after that. Ever since that day, whenever I hear someone talking about ghosts, I just look at the photo I took of Carmen and I break out laughing. Drastic and dire situations create heroes. No one makes history unless their story is inspiring or involves great pain and suffering, overcoming many obstacles and hardships.
No one achieves glory without believing in themselves and their abilities, or at least, that's what I think. Sometimes your path to making history doesn't quite go according to plan. My story is a great example. I'm Joanna. I'm 21 years old. I live with my parents and my little sister Veronica. My father was a police officer. He was very brave. He was my idol. He believed in justice and sacrificed anything to see it done. One of my life goals was to be like him. I loved to see him in his uniform. I viewed him as a hero of sorts and believed the old adage that good always triumphs over evil. Unfortunately, that rosy affirmation doesn't always hold true in real life. My father's work used to keep him terribly busy. Nevertheless, he took a few hours off on Veronica's birthday so he could be there with us. Halfway through the party, Dad's work called and told him that a thug was holding a group of nursery kids hostages, demanding a large sum of money and a means to escape the scene. Dad had to leave to deal with the situation, so he excused himself, telling us that duty calls. We were used to seeing Dad dash off suddenly at various times to deal with crimes in progress, but something felt uneasy about that particular time. Dad arrived at the scene just when his colleagues were preparing to charge into the building at significant risk to the kids. Dad volunteered to enter alone to take out the criminal before anyone got hurt. He sneaked into the building and engaged the hostage taker in a gunfight. He managed to kill the thug, but was seriously wounded. He died days later. The whole police department and the city were saddened by his loss. They held a memorial service for Dad. This senseless crime and the loss of my dad galvanized me to enroll in the police academy. Mom tried her best to dissuade me, but I refused to budge. I passed the entrance exam and worked my way through it. It was a challenging program that required diligence, persistence, and patience. The training was quite difficult at first, with very few breaks, and everyone else was intelligent and competitive. In fact, I began to doubt if I could keep up with them. But then I dreamed of Dad hugging me and telling me that I was his hero and that he would always be at my side. When I woke up the next morning, I felt somehow different, more confident, more resolved to succeed. I worked even harder, and my instructors noticed and acknowledged my extra effort. I made friends who soon gained confidence in my abilities. My grades improved considerably. Graduation day came, and I anxiously waited to see what my first assignment would be. I was ready to tackle crime, to fight for justice, for all. Unfortunately, my first assignment was as a traffic cop. I was disheartened to see my peers get more prestigious positions, even though I had higher grades than they did. Dejected, I went home and told my mom. She encouraged me and told me that everyone had a job to do and should do it to the best of their ability. Rewards would come in time. She said she appreciated the work of traffic cops, who kept city traffic flowing smoothly during accidents and other abnormal situations. Her words helped me to accept my situation. Regardless, the work was boring, and I still envied my peers for their more important and more glamorous assignments. Life's just not fair. But remember those dire situations I mentioned earlier? Well, during one of my traffic control days, when a traffic light had failed, I noticed two black cars idling in front of a bank in a no parking zone. Initially, I thought it was the bank manager or some other VIP stepping into the bank for a quick stop. I turned my attention back to my traffic control and waved the cars waiting in the left turn lane to proceed to turn left. Then, I looked back at the bank and noticed that a man had gotten out of one of the black cars and stepped over to speak with the bank guard, standing outside the bank. Suddenly, he struck the guard and knocked him unconscious. Then the cars emptied as a group of masked men exited and rushed into the bank. These actions all occurred in quick succession. An armed robbery was in progress. I called the police station on my radio and reported the incident. The police quickly showed up and took the waiting car drivers into custody. The masked men had no choice but to remain inside the bank with the customers as hostages. They were trapped. They threatened that if they weren't let go free with the money, they would blow up the bank and kill all the hostages. My father's life and death scene played across my mind like a movie rerun. I watched the policemen discussing what to do. I felt that I knew more about these city blocks than they did, because I spent many hours every day plying these streets, directing traffic. So I volunteered to enter the bank alone. Since this was my beat, I knew that the bank had a secret entrance that the criminals couldn't have known anything about. Thanks to my police training, I was able to easily pick the lock on the secret door and sneak in through the back. I saw 2 hallways, one to the left and one to the right. I decided to take the one on the left. I expected that the right one would lead me to the lobby, where the criminals were holding the hostages. As I moved stealthily, I heard a noise and discovered that I had reached the lobby instead. There were 4 masked men watching the hostages, who had been tied up. Then, I spied a bomb in the midst of the hostages. These guys were definitely serious. One of the hostages spotted me, and I gestured to him not to speak or look at me. Unfortunately, one of the thugs had already noticed the hostage looking in my direction. He looked over and saw me. I fired and hit him in the shoulder. I knew the shot would cause the other policemen to rush in, so I needed to distract the masked man quickly. One criminal was holding a hostage in front of him, and he told me he would kill her if I didn't put my gun down. I lowered my gun to the floor, stood up, and raised my hands. All the masked men were watching me with their backs to the main entrance. Just as I was about to get shot, the police squad rushed in and told them to freeze. The thugs surrendered. The hostages thanked me, and the police chief thanked me for risking my life for the hostages. The next day, the governor called me into his office and praised my bravery and dedication. He surprised me by transferring me from the traffic control division to the crime prevention division. I felt my father's spirit watching me at that moment and smiling with pride. My friends began calling me the Girl of Steel, and I was perfectly okay with that.
We lived with a monster who knew no mercy. He would hit and insult us all the time. I wished him dead on a daily basis. He would kick me out of the house often. But as we all know, there comes a turning point in everyone's life that either ends in success or tragedy. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Lara. I am the middle sister among 4 siblings. We lived with a cruel father, whose bad behavior had long erased any kind memories we may have once had for him. Our mother was kind, lovely, and responsible. She used to take care of us in every way, but she finally had to abandon us because she just couldn't take any more of father's abuse. I remember this scene vividly to this very day. There was a big fight between my parents. At the end of it, Mother had opened the door while holding a suitcase. We were too young to understand anything at the time. She was crying as she turned and walked out of our lives forever. We were expecting Father's attitude to change after that, but it didn't. He continued mistreating and ridiculing us every opportunity he got, neglecting us completely. He gave us neither food nor clothes, only a very small amount of money to fend for ourselves. What could we do? We had to live with the situation. He would often return home drunk at midnight. Scared, we'd stay quiet in our rooms. The only bright spot in our lives was our dear brother Philip. He was Father's favorite son, which caused us to depend on Philip to get anything we need, like money or other necessities. Philip was so funny. He could make us and even Father laugh. He had a way with Father and could usually manipulate him to protect us a little. We all loved Philip. He was the only sunshine in our miserable, gloomy existence. One day, we woke up in the middle of a stormy weather. We turned on the TV and listened to the news. It said the bad weather had spawned a huge tornado. It was heading our way. They advised people to stay inside. We all looked at each other, knowing full well that our old worn-out roof could not withstand the tornado. Philip said he needed to talk to Father. After he knocked and entered Father's room, we heard Father shouting at Philip. Philip had a look of fear on his face. Father then shouted, "If anyone wants to fix anything at home, then he is welcome to, but I will not fix anything." Philip gasped and said, "But Dad, it's a big tornado." Father then grabbed Philip by the collar and pulled him up close, saying, "Then you go fix it." Philip was so afraid he couldn't swallow. Father dragged Philip to the backyard. He brought nails, wood, a hammer, and a long ladder. Philip was terrified when Father pushed these things at him and told him to get to work. Philip begged, "Please, Dad," but Father just shouted, "Go." Philip took the nails, the hammer, and the wood and began to climb the ladder up to the roof. The wind was howling, blowing very hard,
and I had a feeling of dread that something terrible was about to happen. Father just stood there, not worried about Philip's safety at all. To calm us down, Philip looked at us, as if to say, "Don't worry, everyone. I'll be okay." There were many wires on the roof. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind caused Philip to lose his balance, and he reached out to grab onto something to keep from falling. Unfortunately, he got hold of an uninsulated wire. He screamed at once and fell off the roof. We watched, horrified, and began screaming. Father frantically rushed over to Philip's body lying on the ground. He lifted Philip's head into his arms and rocked him gently, but Philip was dead. He got electrocuted. We had never seen Father cry, but he cried a lot that day. At Philip's funeral, we all stood and looked at the photo, showing Philip smiling like an angel. Father hugged us as a group and said, "Please forgive me, kids. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that I loved you all so much. I'm so sorry for not being a good father." We believed him. We hugged him back. He was being sincere with us for once. From that point on, he was a changed man. He gave us everything: love, attention, money. Now we love our home and our lives. I can finally say truthfully, with all my heart, I love you, Daddy. Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren. Did you ever wonder what it would be like to have your life completely destroyed by someone close to you? Ever thought about what you would do then? I didn't have time to think, because that's exactly what happened to me. It all started 2 years ago. I lived a quiet life with my mom and dad and my sister. I loved my family. We were always together. We were happy until that fateful day. My dad got fired from his work, a big company. He had worked there for 20 years. The only money we had then was what he had managed to save over the years. Finding a new job wasn't easy. It was a hard time for all of us, especially my dad. He was becoming desperate. At times, he just sat there, quietly, deep in thought, and I rarely saw him smile since. One late night, we were still up waiting for him when he walked through the door. But something was different. He wasn't walking straight. It was the first time in my life seeing him drunk. I decided to take matters in my own hand. I started job hunting. I was lucky enough to find something suitable at a startup company. The pay was good enough, and the more I worked, the more I earned. I was trying my best to get our life back. I was giving it all I've got. My dad started asking me for money. I was more than happy to give him what he needed. I didn't even ask what it was for. Then he started asking for more. He came late almost every night, and he was never awake in the morning. It seemed like we hadn't talked together for ages. Then, money started disappearing from my purse. I got home from work one night. It had been a long day, and I was really tired. I put my bag in my room, and I went to the kitchen to find something to eat. I made myself a sandwich, then took it back to my room. But when I got to the door, I saw a shadow moving inside. I thought everyone was asleep, so I opened the door slightly and looked inside. I couldn't believe what I saw. My dad was standing over my bag, and my wallet was in his hand. He found no money in it, so he threw it on the bed and started going through my purse. At that moment, my mom came down the stairs. She had my dad's shirt in her hands and a small pack of white powder. I looked at her face. Her eyes were filled with tears. I tried to speak, but found nothing to say. My dad came out of my room. He saw us standing there. Suddenly, everything changed. He tore the shirt and the pack from my mom's hands. He was hysterical. He started breaking things around him. My mom and I were too scared to move, but then my sister came running down the stairs. He pulled her towards him and held a knife to her throat. He threatened to kill her if we didn't give him money. Without a moment's thought, I did what he asked. Things only got worse. Nothing was ever enough. He asked for more and more money, and if I refused, he'd get violent, beating up anyone in his path. I couldn't stand by and watch, so I would just give him what he wanted, until I decided enough was enough. He barged down the stairs one evening and asked for all the money I've got. I told him we had expenses to pay, the rent, school fees, but none of it mattered to him. He asked me again for the money and threatened me if I didn't do what he asked. I refused. He hit me so hard that I crashed my head against the wall. and fell to the floor, bleeding. Everything went dark. My mom took me to different hospitals, and I had to do a lot of checkups and tests. But all the doctors said the same thing, that this was it. I was sentenced to live my life in darkness, never to see the light again. Bumping my head against the wall was one of the reasons, but apparently, my psychological state played a huge role in my recovery. The doctors suggested that I'd be taken to a psychiatrist. My dad felt sorry for what he had done to me. He quit the drugs and alcohol, tried to be proper, but it was because of him that I was in this state. I didn't know if I could ever find it in myself to forgive him. I was torn inside. He was my dad, but I couldn't forget what had happened. I stopped talking shortly after, and he left, disappearing from our lives. No one knew where he was or what he was doing. A year had passed, and he came home. He sounded good, kind of like how he was before. He's trying to make up for what he had done. But to me, nothing he does makes a difference anymore. I'm still in the dark. That's something I'm gonna have to live with my whole life. I can't change that. What do you think I should do?
One of the best feelings in the world for any woman is being a mother. To have someone love you for who you are, for just being you, and expect nothing in return. You're the heroine of their story. You become everything they ever dreamed, and you'd give anything to see a smile on their face. I'm proud to say that I'm a mother to 50 kids. I know that's a lot, but let me tell you the story. I'm Susan, 20 years old. I come from a very rich family. My dad's Stefan Heiss, a very famous businessman. Yes, the owner of Heiss Cars Industry. My mom's Elena. She comes from a very rich family in Sweden. She married my dad and they built their life from scratch. I loved kids, ever since I was a kid. Sometimes I feel like they're walking cotton candy. Their laughs, their mischief. All the kids in our family loved me, and I loved them. Even my aunts said that I'd make a great mother someday. So did Henry. Henry was my childhood friend. We grew up together. We had the same interests, same hobbies. We even thought alike. We got married and started our life together. We were young, but our dreams were big. I was thrilled when I found out that I was pregnant, and Henry was so happy he couldn't believe it. He did everything he could to help me relax. He couldn't wait to be a father. But destiny had something else in store for us. We had just arrived from Sweden. Henry had a problem at work. He was talking on the phone while driving at high speed on a dangerous road. I tried to tell him to watch the road, but it was too late. A truck came out of nowhere and pushed our car off the side. We fell into the lake, and we were unconscious. When I woke up, I found my mother and Henry's mother both looking at me, trying their best not to cry, and I soon found out why. In order to save my life, they put me through an operation. Not only have I lost my child, but I won't be able to have one ever again. Henry was also bruised, but my wounds ran way deeper. That was it, and I could never forgive him. If it weren't for him, none of this would have happened, I thought. None of it. I got a divorce later, after Henry tried over and over and over to fix the situation, to apologize, to ask for a second chance, but all I saw were empty words. There was no second chance. I tried to keep myself busy, find a way to invest my money and time, trying to get my mind off the accident. I decided to open up a toy store. I wanted to bring joy to all the children. One day, as I was standing in my store, I glimpsed a small boy standing out front, looking at a toy. The boy was alone, about 8 years old, but that wasn't all. His clothes were patched up and looked more like rags. His face and hands were dirty, and he just stood there, looking at the doll, daydreaming. I found myself walking out to him, but when he saw me coming, he ran away. A few days passed, and that boy's gaze was all I thought of. Then, one day, I found him outside the store again, looking at a different toy. I moved towards him slowly this time, till I was right beside him. Then I said, "Do you like it?" The boy freaked out and tried to run again, but I caught his arm this time and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm Susan." The boy looked at me, terrified, and I smiled. He started to relax. He told me his name was Billy, and that he was 7, and that he lives nearby. When I asked him about his parents, he said he never knew them, that he lived with Uncle Max, I asked him who Uncle Max was, but he cast his eyes down and was nervous all of a sudden. He looked a bit scared. I got curious, so I took him home with me, let him shower, and prepared a hot meal. I told him that I'd take him home after he'd eaten. I asked him about where he lived. He was quiet for a second. Then he said he had to go, that his brothers and sisters were waiting for him. I asked him how many he had. Around 50, he said. I was shocked. He told me that they all lived in a big room with Uncle Max. But how is this Uncle Max able to look after you all? I asked curiously. But he got nervous again, and he insisted that he must leave, so I decided to take him there. Maybe it'll help clear some of the mystery, I thought. I drove, and Billy was guiding the way. Until we got there. The place was a bit far from all the other houses. It looked more like a dump, with some sort of shack built on it. A man was standing in front of the door, holding a kid by the arm and beating him senseless. The boy was younger than Billy, and Billy was shaking next to me, mumbling to himself, "He's gonna hit me too. I'm so late." Then he turned to me and said, "Bye, Susan. You have to leave now, quickly." And then he ran towards the shack. I backed up the car and stood nearby to see what happens. The man hit him hard across the face, and I heard him say, "Where's the money you stole today, boy?" Billy turned out his empty pockets, and the man dragged him inside by the collar. I wanted to help, so I decided to call Henry, who was more than happy to answer my call. I told him what had happened, and he came to me. We approached the shack together slowly and looked through the window. A lot of children, ages from 3 to 7. The place was a real dump. The man was sitting at a table. It had food and drink. Billy was dragging a heavy sack on the floor, and another kid was carrying a cup to bring to the man, who snatched it out of the boy's hand. Then he got up and started waking the rest of the kids, telling them to get out there and bring him money, that they would face a real nightmare if they didn't. I wanted to barge in, but Henry stopped me. He called the police instead. The police came quickly, and they caught the man. Apparently, he kidnapped these children from parks and surrounding areas, so they could steal for him, and he would starve them and beat them. The police didn't know what to do with all the children, and I felt like this was my second chance. I told the police that I would build a home big enough, and I would take them all in, to give them the care and love that they deserve. And that is how I became a mother to 50 kids.
End-of-the-world scenarios are presented in a lot of Hollywood movies. Zombie apocalypses, alien invasions, meteor collisions, monstrous solar flares, premature ice ages, and worldwide deadly virus outbreaks. The last one is the one I used to imagine, a deadly viral outbreak that spread all over the world and wiped out humankind. My name is Rita, and I'm 21 years old. And as you can see from my introductory paragraph, I have an active imagination. I'm in my senior year at med school, on my way to becoming a doctor. My parents died in a car accident, which left me responsible for raising my younger brother. Our aunts and uncles lived in another city, so they couldn't really help us much. It was up to me to nurture good habits in him regarding food, health, and education. I had to find work after my parents died, so I got a job at the hospital, where all the doctors predicted that I would have a bright future ahead of me. One day, the hospital director called me into his office and told me that I had won a scholarship to study and work in China. I was so happy. I'll get to work and study abroad in a foreign culture, but that meant that my brother would have to come along. So, we went to China, and we got an apartment near the hospital I was supposed to work. China was a beautiful country. All the people worked diligently. The area I was in was exceptionally clean, and all our neighbors were very kind. China was one of the most powerful industrial countries in the world. The only obstacle I faced there was finding suitable food to eat. The Chinese people ate practically anything that moved. Dogs, cats, snakes, scorpions, ugh, disgusting. But when I heard that they ate bats, I threw up all night. During my studies, I knew that China had a lot of rare illnesses, but I never imagined that I would encounter any while I was there. One day, our hospital received a case with strange symptoms. After many diagnostic tests, we still couldn't figure out what the affliction was. The patient had a fever and a very bad cough. His respiratory system was in severe distress, so we put him in the intensive care. Shortly after, we began receiving an influx of patients with the same symptoms, a red flag that an epidemic was probably already on the way, and my brother and I were right in the middle of it. What a nightmare! Soon afterwards, my brother fell ill. That's where I drew the line. If an apocalypse was coming, I wasn't quite ready for it yet, so we left China and returned home. Thousands of people died in China due to that rare disease, but thankfully, my brother recovered fully and is now okay. As for me, I shifted my studies to seeking out a cure for this new coronavirus that broke out in China.
I don't believe in ghosts, evil spirits, haunted houses, metaphysics, etc. I only believe in science and facts. But sometimes things happen that shred all your beliefs. I want to introduce myself. I'm Lisa. I'm 14 years old. I live with my mom, dad, and grandmother. And they're all very proud of me. I'm the leader of the science club at school, and I've been the perfect student for the past 2 years. My hobbies are reading, watching educational videos, and learning. I like to discuss matters with rational people, not those who believe in myths, aliens, ghosts, and other such nonsense. I personally think these people have mental issues. One morning, my grandmother passed away. I was sad for a long time because I missed her so much. On the day of her funeral, the whole city must have come to say goodbye. While the priests were praying, I noticed something peculiar about one of the graves in the graveyard. After the prayer ended, I approached the grave in question to investigate. There was some weird writing on it. Then, a wispy, transparent, smoky figure appeared out of nowhere. It said to me, "Do not get closer to Donna Median's grave. Beware." I shivered slightly and asked the apparition who Donna was. And it replied. Who was she? She was an evil witch who liked to scare people. She was burned at the stake as a witch, but before her death, she swore a curse that if anyone ever approached her grave, her ghost would haunt that person to the day they die. I did not laugh at the apparition's warning. Instead, I turned and returned home, thinking about what had happened. On a sudden defiant impulse, I decided to visit that grave that night to see for myself if the curse was real. I took my dad's flashlight and wore a raincoat. It was pitch black outside. The place was horribly unsettling at night, but I wasn't worried at all. It's not like it was real, right? I entered the gate to the sound of howling dogs and meowing cats. My blood ran cold, and a sudden chill ran through me. I turned on the flashlight and began searching for the grave. My hands were trembling so badly, I dropped the flashlight several times. Sometimes I would step on something crunchy, and I would shine the light downward, only to see that I had stepped on an insect. Sometimes I'd see a cat here and there. Then suddenly, I heard an eerie sound close by. I froze, not daring to move. Slowly, I pointed my light towards the sound and gasped as my light illuminated a dark, shadowy figure. It was about my height and dressed all in black. I spun around and fled as rapidly as my faithful feet could carry me. I dove into bed, but I didn't sleep at all that night. I even left the lights on. The next day, when I woke up, I asked my dad if graveyards had ghosts, and he wondered why I would ask such a question. I was embarrassed and laughed to hide my fear. I told him that I was just curious. That was all. Dad looked at me suspiciously, but continued. I've heard stories, he said, that some people have seen a ghost of a girl from time to time beside Donna Median's grave. I felt my heart sink, and I asked slowly, "Is she about my height and dressed in black?" He replied, "Yes, that's how I've heard the ghost described." "How in the world did you know that?" I looked down casually and answered, "Oh, I read an article about it on the internet last night." My head hurt just thinking about this ghost thing. I made up my mind to prove or disprove it once and for all. I called my friend Laura and persuaded her to come with me to the grave. The following night, we met at the stroke of midnight at the entrance to the graveyard. Laura was shaking and constantly casting glances right and left. The weather was rainy and gloomy. The ground was muddy, and cats were meowing everywhere. It would have made the perfect setting for a supernatural horror movie. While we were looking for Donna's grave, flying bats would occasionally startle Laura, causing her to scream alarmed. As we approached Donna's grave, we suddenly heard a sound behind us. We both turned around at the same time and screamed. A ghost was glaring at us. It asked angrily, "What are you doing beside my grandmother's grave?" "Wait a minute. Are you girls?" She uncovered her face, revealing that she was just a girl, and a beautiful one at that. She told us that her name was Carmen and asked me to turn off the flashlight because it hurt her eyes. I did. Then I asked, "Who are you?" She replied, "I'm the 5th grandchild of Donna Median, the poor woman in this grave who has been wrongly accused." We both whispered back, "Wrongly accused?" She continued saying, "Yes, she was a victim of the Holocaust during World War II. Afterwards, she became a simple doctor who treated people who were afflicted with epilepsy. As usual, there are always some small-minded, superstitious people looking to make trouble for others. They accused her of being a witch because they considered epilepsy to be a disease caused by a demon's touch. I come here every day to put flowers on her grave. People have mistaken me for a ghost because I only come at night. I don't want people to know I'm related to someone they think to be a witch. I don't want to be shunned, scorned, or gossiped about." I tried to comfort her and calm her a little by saying, "Don't worry, Carmen. Your grandmother's spirit may be able to rest in peace if you tell people the truth now. We live in more modern times, and there's no need to worry. I won't tell anyone about you being the ghost. It'll be our little secret." Carmen laughed. She and I became good friends after that. Ever since that day, whenever I hear someone talking about ghosts, I just look at the photo I took of Carmen and I break out laughing.
In legends and horror stories, ghosts are typically spirits of the dead, those who suffered greatly in their lives, that when their time comes, they choose to linger in this world, to sow hatred and chaos among the living. Do you believe this, that there are vengeful spirits living among us, right here, right now? I do, and my story will tell you why. I'm Martha. I'm 19 years old, and I have a twin sister, Caroline. She wasn't just my sister, but we were best friends and subsequent partners in crime. We suffered a miserable life because we lived in poverty. Our parents were very poor, despite belonging to a rich family. Grandpa, on my dad's side of the family, worked in the petroleum industry, where he made lots of investments and projects. And fortunately, he had a lot of enemies too, many of whom were from Mom's side of the family. Dad was the middle son, but he assumed responsibility for Grandpa's work because he was very competent and capable. Similarly, Mom became responsible for her father's work. She did her best to avoid conflict between her side of the family and Dad's side, so that they could work together peacefully. It was at this point, I believe, that vengeful spirits must have come into play. My parents had loved each other since their childhood, but they didn't tell their families about it. In the past, both my grandpas were once friends and partners. They worked together within the same company, but they later became enemies and split the company into two. Both families hated each other that day forth. All of them, except for my parents. Mom's uncles took over her company and fired her. Dad couldn't bear to see Mom in this situation, so he told his dad that he was going to marry her. So his father made him choose between my mother and the company with all the power and wealth that came with it. To Grandpa's chagrin, Dad chose Mom over everything else. And so, they got married and lived together with Grandma. They faced life's problems without any support from anyone. Grandpa felt betrayed by Dad and disowned him. Then, Carolyn and I were born. Dad did his best to make us happy and give us everything we needed. Grandma told us about our family's history and how both our parents had been cut off from their families out of sheer greed and betrayal. It felt a bit unfair, but this was our life now. Then, one day, we heard Dad speaking on the phone, with Mom standing beside him, and they were both acting very nervous. He told her to take care of us, and then he left the house and never came back. Mom never told us where he went or why he left. Sometime after that, Grandma passed away. Our situation was getting worse. We thought we had to do something to help Mom. Maybe we were being influenced by those vengeful spirits I mentioned. But either way, Carolyn and I made our decision to go over to the dark side. We decided to steal, rob, defraud. We were smart enough. Together, we could definitely pull it off. We began with our neighbor, very wealthy, but very cheap. We figured she must be keeping her money somewhere in the house, since she didn't believe in leaving a dime in the bank's care and was completely convinced that they would steal her money. Lucky for us, I guess. And we were right. We infiltrated her house when she was away and found a load of money stashed away under a loose tile on the floor. Took some time to find, but we got it. When we got home, the house was completely deserted. Mom wasn't there. Her clothes were all gone from the wardrobe. We were on our own now. We began exploiting jewelry shop owners. We would pretend to be a wealthy customer and tell the owner that we wanted to take the jewelry home to show our mom and get her opinion. We would drug hotel owners and put all the money in their safe into a bag, then scream and call for help, saying that the owner had just collapsed, creating a diversion and disappearing in the crowd. We were getting quite good at it. Our wealth slowly grew day by day. Mom called every now and then to check that we were fine on our own. Of course, she knew nothing about our work or what we were doing to survive. Our ultimate goal was to earn a lot of money and run away to another country to start a new life. One evening, I was with my friends, and I met a guy named Craig. He was rich, but somehow seemed different than all the people we robbed. Later I found out, to my surprise, that he was our cousin, the grandson of the man that had taken everything away from my mother and fired her. Unsure of what to do, I told Carolyn what I knew. She went ecstatic. She told me that this was our chance to take back everything, the company, the money that belonged to us. But for the first time, we didn't quite agree. Craig was nothing like his father. He wasn't greedy. He was kind and gentle. He often told me that money was a curse if it meant living alone away from people that we care about and cherish. I made up my mind, and I told Carolyn that I couldn't be a part of our evil scheming anymore, and I wanted out. And so I left her and went to live on my own. At this point, I had no idea what Carolyn was up to. In the meantime, Craig was negotiating a deal that would earn his company a lot of profit. He told me to come visit at the company, and then we would go out for dinner. I accepted happily. When I arrived at his company, I sensed someone behind me. Then, suddenly a hand pressed a handkerchief over my mouth, and I passed out. When I woke up, I found Craig unconscious beside me. To the side, I could see his safe was wide open. Papers were scattered everywhere, and in my hand was the key to the safe. Then the police arrived, found the safe key in my hand, and accused me of being a thief. I told them that I had been drugged unconscious, just like Craig. The police officer looked inside my bag and found a bottle of chloroform. I was shocked, to say the least. I couldn't understand what had happened. They took me downstairs and tried to wake up Craig. At about that time, a woman in a black wig came over to me and said, "Martha, you betrayed me." It was Carolyn. I couldn't believe that she framed me. Then she left. Her betrayal hurt me deeply. A part of my brain told me that I had betrayed her first, but that doesn't matter now. When I get out of prison, someday, I resolved to get my revenge on her. We were no longer sisters. Just as we had been betrayed by our families before us, we were now locked into yet another circle of family betrayal. Only it was more personal and closer to home this time. Were they truly vengeful spirits influencing us? I think so. What about you?
Beauty has myriad aspects. Some girls have a beautiful exterior, but with an ugly personality on the inside. Some are ugly on the outside, but have a beautiful personality. Some are average on the outside, but inside are very educated and elegant in behavior. This is where the idea of the Miss World contest originally came from. The girl who has the most aspects of beauty overall should be able the title. But what if a girl is beautiful in every way except for the external beauty that is valued above all other aspects? Does she really stand a chance at all? My name is Naomi, and I am 16 years old. I live with my mom and 2 sisters. I am the middle daughter. My dad died a long time ago in a horrible train accident, leaving Mom to raise us alone. So she taught us to be independent, to trust in ourselves, and to determine our own paths in life. We excelled at school and had plenty of friends. But life didn't give us everything, There is always a blemish on anyone's life. For me, it was beauty. I was boringly plain-looking. No one wanted to date me. But I was okay with that because I knew that most boys were idiots, concerned only about a pretty face, even if that pretty face belonged to an empty-headed dimwit. Our school held an annual beauty contest based solely on external beauty, so I figured that it was time to change the rules of the game. I went to the teacher responsible for organizing this contest and suggested that this year's contest be a multifaceted beauty contest. I explained about considering internal aspects of beauty, such as maturity, responsibility, social interactions, academic performance, environmental awareness, character, personality, talent, hobbies, aspirations, etc. The teacher smiled and told me that she didn't have the control in this matter, but said she would speak with the principal. She asked for 2 days to try to persuade him. The 2 days crawled by at a snail's pace, but I was rewarded by my new rules adopted for this year's beauty contest. It would focus on both the inner and outer aspects of beauty. The student body was divided on the issue. My group cheered the new rules, but Emily's group hated it. Emily had won the school's beauty contest for the previous 2 years. She was as beautiful as a Walt Disney princess. Long blonde hair, lovely soothing voice, green eyes, elegant posture, but snobbish, vapid, shallow, narrow-minded. She testily asked the air, "Whose idea were these stupid new rules?" "Mine," I answered simply. She glared at me and told me that the old rules had been the standing rules for eons and couldn't be changed. But I corrected her by telling her that everything changes. She dismissed me with a wave of her hand by telling me that it didn't matter, that she was a shoo-in to win anyway, regardless of any stupid rule changes. I read the flyer about the contest and the new rules. One facet to be evaluated was how well a student contributed to the school's goals of fostering kindness and learning. Another facet was one's talent and hobbies like poetry, drawing, acting, or singing. Another was general knowledge of the world. And yet another was about etiquette, politeness, and manners. I put my plan into motion to win this contest from vain, brainless Emily. Still, she seemed so confident that I felt like I had no real chance of actually beating her. The contest, which would span several days, began. The first phase of the competition was on the social aspects of beauty. Emily chose to woo the students by distributing roses and chocolates to them. In addition, she flirted with the more popular boys to get them and their friends to like her. Other contestants distributed different things to students. I needed to do something distinctive and unexpected, something genuinely useful. So I summarized the semester's school subjects for the students so they could study more easily and efficiently for their final exams. I also asked Mom to prepare healthy lunches for them. My ideas were well received. The next phase was general knowledge. The judges paired everyone with a rival. The winners of those pairs would then be paired repeatedly until only one winner emerged by elimination. I was paired with Emily. Favoring her external beauty, the judges asked her easy questions. Me, I got the challenging questions. But despite this biased treatment, I answered all the questions correctly. The next part was about artistic talent. Emily was an excellent actress. Imagine that. She portrayed a stage scene and won well-deserved praise for her performance. My talent was drawing. I drew an intricate drawing and recited a poem. My heart was pounding during my poem recital, but I managed to receive vigorous applause. Emily was staring daggers at me. If looks could kill, my death would have eliminated me from the contest at that very moment. The next phase of the contest focused on costumes. I told Mom that I didn't see how I could possibly be Emily, but she continued to encourage me and believe in me. Her words inspired me. When I woke up that day, I was surprised by a new dress in my closet. It was so stylish and fit my form perfectly. It made me look like Cinderella. I wore it and went to the school. All the girls were beautifully dressed, as was I, I'm happy to say. I did well in this phase. The final phase would be judged on external beauty. The judging began, and all the contestants were so beautifully made up, with expensive hairdos and elegant sparkly dresses, that my spirit plummeted as my chances of winning seemed almost nil. Then suddenly, I had a crazy idea. I whispered in Mom's ear and went into the restroom. When they called my name, I walked up onto the stage in clean, neat, everyday school clothes, with no makeup and no fancy hairdo. Just plain old me. I asked the judges for permission to speak, and they allowed it. Directing my speech to the students present, I explained that my external appearance was not what true beauty was about. Yes, I could dress up and smile for one day to impress the judges. But what about the other days of the year? People's outward appearance should be respectful, decent, and proper all the time. When I finished my speech, it was met with enthusiastic applause, even by the judges. Now it was time to announce the overall winner of the contest. As is typical, they announced the third place winner, then the second place winner. I hadn't heard my name yet and was sure that Emily's name was about to be announced for first place. When I heard my name announced for first place, I screamed with joy. I couldn't believe it. Everyone was cheering for me, and Mom was looking so proud. After the contest was over, a shy but well-mannered and well-behaved boy came over and asked me for a date. I turned toward Emily and smiled sweetly. She didn't return my smile. Well, long story short, a plain Jane, me, won the overall contest and proved that even an ugly duckling can be loved for its inner beauty.
Friendship is not a word that is easily described. In fact, those who know the true meaning of it are scarce. It usually comes with a bond of trust that is not easily broken. The question is, can you believe in that bond till the very end, no matter what? My name is Sophie. I'm 21 years old. I used to live with my parents and my two siblings, Lena and Brian. Dad's an architect. Mom's a doctor. But she had to leave her job to take care of Brian and Lena because they were young and still needed her care and attention. And for a long time, so did I. As a kid, my parents were always worried about me. I didn't have any friends at school, and I was very shy. I would immediately cry when something happened, but all that changed when I met my guardian angel, Matilda. The way we met was somewhat bizarre. I did pretty well in my studies at school. I had hobbies like art and music. Unfortunately, there was this one group of girls who liked to bully people like me. One day, in science class, I was carrying a project I was working on when those girls stopped me and tried to take my project. Just when I was about to cry and let them steal it from me, a girl appeared and told them to leave me alone, or else they would have to deal with her. When they saw her, they looked frightened and left in a hurry. I didn't know the girl, but when I turned to look at her, I saw that she was a tall brunette with a beautiful smile. She took my project and held it for me because I was shaking and sobbing. Then she walked me to class and told me she would be back during break to check on me. As she was leaving, she called back to me and shouted that her name was Matilda and said that she would see me later. She did indeed come back during break. The clique of bully girls left me alone after that and kept their distance from Matilda as well. I asked Matilda why they were so afraid of her. She laughed and said it was a long story, but the short version was that she beat them up once, and they became afraid of her and stayed clear ever since. I asked her how she knew that those girls were always bothering me. She said it was pure coincidence, that she had happened to be in the classroom the day they tried to take my project from me. She said that I looked so helpless that she decided to step in. I asked her to be my friend. She teared up a little and said, "Of course," and from that day forward, we became the best of friends. I was cheerful every day now, and we grew closer and closer together. The happiest days of my life. Her story was unusual. Her dad was a boxer. Her parents split up because her mom couldn't stand the thought of him risking his life boxing every day, so she left. Her dad did his best to look after Maddie and her 2 little sisters. Then, one day, he was killed by thieves who robbed him as he was coming home from work, leaving Maddie to raise her siblings alone. This heavy responsibility matured her and toughened her character. She taught me to be bold, to love adventures. I feared nothing with her there. I dealt with situations decisively, without hesitation. We were like 2 separate halves of a ship sailing in the dark that happened to find each other one night and came together to complete each other. This was how I met Maddie, and our friendship grew stronger year after year. Maddie and her sisters were like my own sisters. We were all one big happy family, until something happened that disturbed the fabric of our universe. I enrolled in the College of Engineering, while she enrolled in a different college. The first year of college was difficult for me, because I missed Maddie so much. But then I tried really hard and focused on my studies. In my 3rd year, I met Matthew, a player on the college basketball team. During that time, I was working for the college newspaper, and I was assigned to interview him. He was smart, handsome, and had an inspiring story. His parents died when he was young, leaving him responsible for his younger brother, so he decided to work and earn money while pursuing his dream of being a basketball player. By the time we met, he had a chance to play in the NBA. We had a connection, and he proposed to me. I wanted to tell Maddie so badly, to share this wonderful news with her, but I couldn't. Maddie had completely disappeared that year, and I hadn't seen her at all. I didn't know where she was or how to reach her. Then, one day, I got a call from her. Her voice sounded distressed, maybe because her responsibilities were such a burden on her. Either way, I was glad she called. She seemed sad, and I asked her what I could do to help. I told her that I wanted to see her, so we could catch up. She agreed, and told me that we needed to get together soon. When we finally met, I saw that she had lost a lot of weight. I asked her why, and she replied that she was working while going to college. She wasn't looking after herself at all, but her eyes told another story. I told her about Matthew, and that we were getting married soon. She smiled, but her joy seemed affected somehow. I didn't know how to describe it. Perhaps it was the disconnected look in her eyes. I wanted to introduce her to Matthew, but apparently they had already met. They spoke politely to each other, but there seemed to be something between them that made us all feel uncomfortable. I didn't know what it was. A while later, Matthew was always nervous about something. He always seemed to be busy with training or games. But was that all there was? At the same time, Maddie had started acting weird as well. Something was going on between them, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Whenever her phone rang, Maddie wouldn't answer, or even look to see who was calling. Shortly before my wedding, Maddie had disappeared again without notice. Matthew went back to his normal self, and everything seemed to be fine. The wedding ceremony was going beautifully, until we got to the part where the preacher said, "Anyone who saw a reason why this marriage should not take place, may they speak now or forever hold their peace." Well, it turned out that there was someone who saw a reason why this marriage should not take place, and that someone did speak up. And much to my amazement, it was Maddie. She shouted that Matthew was her fiancé, and that he had deceived her and left her for me. Matthew looked at her with a perplexed look on his face, as if this was news to him. I felt like time had shifted into slow motion. I had to be dreaming. I couldn't imagine why neither of them told me this before. I looked at Maddie and asked if it was true. She said, "I'm done lying to you. I don't want to act anymore. Meeting you has been the most horrible thing that has ever happened to me. My life was going well till I met you. You got everything you wanted, even Matthew. He chose you instead." I was staring, lost for words. Tears started running down my face. "Please leave," I said quietly. Maddie was crying too, yet she smiled and walked away. I didn't understand her behavior. Why did she smile as she walked out of my life? Days later, the answer revealed itself. Matthew and I knew each other well, and what happened at the wedding did not affect us at all. Still, I could see it in Matthew's eyes. He had something to tell me, and one day, he came inside the house with tears in his eyes. I asked what was wrong. if his family was okay. He nodded and said, "They're all fine, Sophie, but there's something I've been wanting to tell you. During those times, when Maddie disappeared without warning, it was because she kept a secret from you. She had a terminal disease. She was dying. I was shocked." He continued and said that she had arranged the scene at the wedding to make me hate her, so that when she died, I wouldn't feel grief or sorrow, that she had loved me so much. Soon after our wedding day, her disease took a turn for the worst, and she died. I was still standing in shock. He gave me the letter she wrote me. "Dear Sophie, I'm sure that up to this point in time, you didn't understand my strange behavior, my sudden change. It was necessary to protect you from the shock of my death. I had no choice but to make you hate me. Don't be upset with me, dear Sophie. These are the last moments in my life, and I just wanted to tell you that I love you. Forever friends, Matilda." I cried like I never did before. I had lost my best friend. Dear Maddie, now I know the reason for your tearful smile when you left the wedding that day. You are still my one true friend. Not a moment has passed without thinking of you. Forgive me for not being there when you needed me most. You will always be in my heart.
7 years old can be a very critical age in a human's life. It's the year we graduate from first grade to second grade. It also may be the year when you first participate in a sport that will shape your future. But for me, it was the age when my parents decided they wanted to lead separate lives. I grew up like any average girl, attended a good preschool, participated in sports, and had good friends. My parents, as I recall, were always in a good mood with each other and shared the joy of raising their daughter together. I have few memories of the bad times my parents had argued. The worst memory I recall is lying in my bed one night when I was 7 years old and having my parents come into my room and my father saying, "Tanya, your mother and I are getting a divorce." My immediate reaction was a natural instinct for a young child, which was to blame myself. I often had more than one birthday party as a kid. This sounds cool, but it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. I'm a child of divorce. My childhood wasn't mine. It belonged to my parents. I lost myself in every effort to appease each side of my family. Shuffling alone between two separate lives meant that I was on the fringe of each family, never an insider. The people I loved most were never in the same room together, and many of them barely even knew each other existed. I missed out on events and celebrations because I would have to spend time with my other family. Children of divorce learn to cope with these struggles and instability by the age of 10. I no longer wanted to deal with it. I didn't want to live in two different homes with two different bedrooms, different clothes, different toys, different friends, and even different rules. I was a 10-year-old caught between a rock and a hard place. So one day I told my dad that I didn't want to visit anymore. It was a courageous and ignorant act, to be honest. We will never know if it was the right decision or not. But at the time, neither one of my parents possessed the emotional stability it would have taken to unearth a more positive solution. And so that was the way things went. The power struggle that had lain dormant between my parents erupted again, and this time it was directed at me. This time I was responsible for the discord. In one house, I was blamed. In the other, I was a victim. There were no more multiple birthday parties. Instead, there was stability and consistency in one house, anger and avoidance in the other. Choice is met with consequences, and as time went on, I fell out of touch with my dad's family. It's hard to stay in touch with people connected to someone we have pushed away. Cousins I used to play with were erased from my life. We never visited again. Was that because it's best to keep served ties cut? Or was it my punishment for being a horrible child? All I knew was silence and loss. When I was in my early teens, my mom remarried and I met new cousins. I learned new Christmas traditions and sat with new kids at the dinner table. Instead of being ushered from one family to the other, life settled down. Even though I heard from my dad only once or twice a year, life was fairly stable. But that changed again when my mom and stepdad split up during my first year of university. I tried to keep in touch with my family members every time I went home for the holidays. Again, I tried to please everyone while anxiety flooded my thoughts. Whom should I spend Christmas Eve with? Should I visit with this family or that one? Will they be offended if I don't make time to see them? Will they be offended if I don't bring presents? I would have loved to have everyone drop by and visit me, but that would not have gone very well at my mom's house. Instead, I diligently visited everybody on my own, carrying thoughtful little presents I bought on my student budget. I would make small talk and feel like an outsider. I was always the awkward guest, never the welcoming host. For 10 years after I graduated from university, I lived away from home. Not a single family member from any one of my 4 families, save for my mom, came to visit, called, or even let me know when they flew through town. Yet, every time I went home for Christmas, I scheduled visits, bought presents, and made time to see as many people as I could. I did this to make them feel good, not me. 2 years ago, I moved back home, and now I live less than a day's drive away from all 4 of my families, their new spouses, and young kids. We're all connected on Facebook, but my mom is still the only person who ever calls or visits. When I hear that a family member passed through town but didn't call, it saddens me. But I realized that they don't call because they don't really know me. To them, I was never a fixture. I was only ever around a few Christmases here and there, and although they were my family, I was never theirs. They don't know that they are just one of several people spread across 4 different families that I wasn't able to keep in touch with. Sometimes divorce spreads us too thin to make anything real, lasting family connections. This summer, I am getting married and starting my family. I'm trying not to have too many expectations. I know no family is perfect, but my soon-to-be husband is the king at keeping in touch with people. He's persistent, charismatic, forgiving, and loyal. He's teaching me what family means. Together, we will teach our kids to reach out to one another with compassion and to stick by each other through times of darkness. I'm looking forward to joy and friendship with my new family, and I plan to do everything I can to stay married.
Hello, I'm Sarah. Ever heard of a phobia before? Don't worry, it's not contagious or anything. It just means you're scared of something in particular. Places, people, things. I have a phobia, but I don't like to talk about it. And I definitely don't want to be seen in that state. I was in my second year at college. I had been very busy that semester because we had a lot of assignments, and it was fine. I mean, I liked studying and completing tasks, but I was never a nerd or a geek. No. I like to dress nicely too. I have my own fashion and style. It wasn't easy making friends though. There were 2 types of people at my school. Smart nerds who couldn't care less how they dress, and complete airheads who dressed nice. I didn't fit in either one of those groups, so I basically kept to myself until one day I got assigned to do a task with a girl and a boy, Jane and Kyle. They didn't look nerdy at all, and I thought to myself, oh great, looks like I'll be doing all the work. But when we started talking about the project, they didn't just sit there or toss ridiculous retorts. All 3 of us were having an actual conversation about the topic. I was so thrilled. It finally seemed like I belonged somewhere. We became friends and did everything together. We could tell each other anything. Well, not everything. I had one secret from my friends. I never told them I had a phobia. Anyway, a year later, Jane moved to Germany with her parents. She was going to finish college there. So it was just Kyle and I now. All through college, we were the best of friends. We even did our graduation project together. On graduation day, Kyle and I were supposed to go out for dinner. He wouldn't tell me where, said it was a surprise. And what a surprise it was. He had picked the highest tower in the whole city to eat dinner at the very top. I don't have a problem with high places in particular. In fact, I'm sure I'll love the view if I ever make it to the top. No, I had a problem with the elevator. A phobia, to be precise. So we were standing at the base of the tower, and Kyle was happily listing all the great features and restaurants up there, but I didn't hear any of it. I was too busy fretting, frozen to the spot, desperately trying to find a way out of the situation. I couldn't say no to Kyle, who was all excited to go up the tower, so I clenched it in and tried my best to stay calm. We got in the elevator, and the doors shut. I couldn't control what came after that. I was terrified, screaming and shouting hysterically, banging on the walls, then falling to the ground. Of course, I don't actually remember any of it. Kyle told me later on. The last thing I remember was the elevator doors shutting close. When I came to, I was at the hospital. Kyle was sitting by my bed looking worried. When he saw that I woke up and that I was feeling fine, he started laughing at me, saying, "Why didn't you tell me you had a phobia?" I felt ridiculous and started laughing too. And then, out of nowhere, he proposed. It was his plan all along, although he pictured it at the top of the tower. All that happened 3 years ago. We're married now, and we have a baby girl. I'm being treated for my phobia. It's not completely gone, but I'm way better now. Apparently, hiding my problems never solves them. I'll have to face them, sooner or later.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren. Did you ever wonder what it would be like to have your life completely destroyed by someone close to you? Ever thought about what you would do then? I didn't have time to think, because that's exactly what happened to me. It all started 2 years ago. I lived a quiet life with my mom and dad and my sister. I loved my family. We were always together. We were happy until that fateful day. My dad got fired from his work, a big company. He had worked there for 20 years. The only money we had then was what he had managed to save over the years. Finding a new job wasn't easy. It was a hard time for all of us, especially my dad. He was becoming desperate. At times, he just sat there, quietly, deep in thought, and I rarely saw him smile since. One late night, we were still up waiting for him when he walked through the door. But something was different. He wasn't walking straight. It was the first time in my life seeing him drunk. I decided to take matters in my own hand. I started job hunting. I was lucky enough to find something suitable at a startup company. The pay was good enough, and the more I worked, the more I earned. I was trying my best to get our life back. I was giving it all I've got. My dad started asking me for money. I was more than happy to give him what he needed. I didn't even ask what it was for. Then he started asking for more. He came late almost every night, and he was never awake in the morning. It seemed like we hadn't talked together for ages. Then, money started disappearing from my purse. I got home from work one night. It had been a long day, and I was really tired. I put my bag in my room, and I went to the kitchen to find something to eat. I made myself a sandwich, then took it back to my room. But when I got to the door, I saw a shadow moving inside. I thought everyone was asleep, so I opened the door slightly and looked inside. I couldn't believe what I saw. My dad was standing over my bag, and my wallet was in his hand. He found no money in it, so he threw it on the bed and started going through my purse. At that moment, my mom came down the stairs. She had my dad's shirt in her hands and a small pack of white powder. I looked at her face. Her eyes were filled with tears. I tried to speak, but found nothing to say. My dad came out of my room. He saw us standing there. Suddenly, everything changed. He tore the shirt and the pack from my mom's hands. He was hysterical. He started breaking things around him. My mom and I were too scared to move, but then my sister came running down the stairs. He pulled her towards him and held a knife to her throat. He threatened to kill her if we didn't give him money. Without a moment's thought, I did what he asked. Things only got worse. Nothing was ever enough. He asked for more and more money, and if I refused, he'd get violent, beating up anyone in his path. I couldn't stand by and watch, so I would just give him what he wanted, until I decided enough was enough. He barged down the stairs one evening and asked for all the money I've got. I told him we had expenses to pay, the rent, school fees, but none of it mattered to him. He asked me again for the money and threatened me if I didn't do what he asked. I refused. He hit me so hard that I crashed my head against the wall and fell to the floor, bleeding. Everything went dark. My mom took me to different hospitals, and I had to do a lot of checkups and tests, but all the doctors said the same thing, that this was it. I was sentenced to live my life in darkness, never to see the light again. Bumping my head against the wall was one of the reasons, but apparently, my psychological state played a huge role in my recovery. The doctors suggested that I'd be taken to a psychiatrist. My dad felt sorry for what he had done to me. He quit the drugs and alcohol, tried to be proper, but it was because of him that I was in this state. I didn't know if I could ever find it in myself to forgive him. I was torn inside. He was my dad, but I couldn't forget what had happened. I stopped talking shortly after, and he left, disappearing from our lives. No one knew where he was or what he was doing. A year had passed, and he came home. He sounded good, kind of like how he was before. He's trying to make up for what he had done. But to me, nothing he does makes a difference anymore. I'm still in the dark. That's something I'm gonna have to live with my whole life. I can't change that. What do you think I should do?
I am Matthew, 21 years old, and I must tell you something. I am a madman. I need treatment. But what kind of treatment is there for my kind of madness? You see before you a man with torn clothes who speaks to himself all the time. I used to be a doctor, but I left medicine to pursue aromatology. In case you were wondering, aromatology is the study of fragrances, such as scents of flowers and how they affect people. Let me tell you my story. My parents were very proud of me because I was intelligent, well-known, and well-respected at my university. I earned high marks in all my courses. Dad wanted me to join the College of Medicine because he had always dreamed of my becoming a doctor, and I felt that I couldn't deny him that. My parents did their best to make me happy and to help me achieve Dad's dream. But to be honest with you, medicine, engineering, the arts, none of these interested me at all. They weren't my dream. I loved flowers and their fragrances, like rose and honeysuckle. I would extract fragrances from them and give them as gifts to my friends and family. They all really enjoyed these aromatic gifts. My dilemma was that I had to find a way to tell Dad that I would rather study botany, plants, and aromatology, fragrances, over medicine any day. I knew he would think that I was crazy to give up the lofty study of medicine to work with flowers, but what can I say? I have loved flowers and fragrances ever since I was a youngster. I have always been fascinated by exotic flowers and scents. Learning how to make fragrances from flowers required me to meet with a lot of people who worked in this field. One day, I had to face the moment I had been dreading because my parents had arranged a large social gathering to celebrate my success at the university and my joining the College of Medicine. Dad asked me to tell everyone about my ambitions as a doctor. I suddenly knew that the moment had come when I needed to make my startling announcement to my parents. I told the audience I had decided that being a doctor was not for me and that I was going to change my field of study. Dad looked at me with an astonished look on his face, and then he began laughing. He thought I was joking. Then I turned to him and said, "Dad, I'm not joking. I'm serious. I want to study flowers and fragrances, similar to the types of gifts I've given you before." The audience suddenly got very quiet. They could sense that this was an epiphany for my parents. The embarrassment and shock in the air was palpable. Dad looked at me and said with an affected smile, "Matthew, you were born to be a doctor. Forget all this nonsense about silly flowers." A little testily, I said, "Dad, extracting fragrances from flowers is not silly." Dad said, "Bah, forget about that." The party spirit was somewhat subdued after this testy exchange. Regardless, in deference to Dad, I began studying medicine, but most of my energy and attention was directed towards flowers and their fragrances. Sometimes I would spend time with my medical friends, and sometimes with my aromatology friends that I had met earlier. I spent my first year in medical college earning high marks as usual, but I had no passion for it. It neither excited nor interested me. There came a day when I had had my fill of medical studies and just couldn't take it anymore. So I decided to leave the College of Medicine to pursue my true passion, flowers and fragrances. When I told Dad of my decision, he was very upset, cursing at me and accusing me of being mad, insane, crazy. I repeated that I had zero interest in medicine and stated that the true madness was sticking with a field that I really didn't like at all. I moved away from home and stayed with a friend for a while before finally renting and moving into a small apartment. I faced a lot of obstacles in the beginning, but I didn't give up. I set up an arboretum by planting some flowers and nurturing them. I was working on a rare kind of fragrance extracted from a variety of flowers. I had to travel to obtain these specimens. My product fragrances weren't successful at first, but I persisted. Initially, I offered my fragrance products to various factories, but all refused my offer. So I continued in my studies. I worked in many different places. In the evenings, I would spend all my free time doing my experiments. Over time, I grew more proficient in producing unique fragrances. Then one day, I received a phone call from a famous factory. The factory owner told me that he might be interested in working with me, so I sent him some samples of my work, and they delighted him. And I was delighted that he was delighted. Thus began the lucrative stage of my new endeavor. I started earning a decent income and achieved a modicum of success in the end. After a while, I called Dad and asked him to forgive me, and he did, finally realizing that my passions were not necessarily his passions, and that I must pursue what I enjoyed the most. I have my own factory now. I achieved my dream in the end. My advice to you, the readers, is never to give up when pursuing your dreams. With persistence, you will be successful one day. So what do you think? Was I a madman to give up medicine for aromacology? Was I a madman to give up medicine for aromacology?
I'm a 22-year-old college student and I live with my parents because I refuse to stay at a college dorm and waste my money on the rent, since my campus is in my city. With that being said, my parents have been together since 1985. For the 22 years that I've been living, I have never known my father to entertain other women while he's been married to my mom. He is the best father I could ever ask for. He spoils me and my siblings until this day. My older brother is 25 and my younger brother is 20. He has done and still does so much for my mom and her family. My mom has sickle cell, and my dad has always been a rock for her. He's naturally a giving person and loves helping people. As a father, he's been near perfect. I thought even as a husband he was, until a few days ago. After a hectic day at my niece's christening, my mom noticed that my dad's other phone kept on vibrating. It was on silent, and she asked me to take it off silent. My parents are both in their 50s, so they aren't tech savvy as us. Anyway, I did that and she noticed a bunch of calls from this one person with the same number. That person called again and my mom answered. It happened to be another woman on the line who said, "Hey," in a really friendly voice. Once she heard my mother answer, the girl hung up and wasn't returning any further calls. And that was the first red flag. So my mom goes downstairs to the kitchen and confronts my dad about it. And he's dumbfounded and tries to play stupid. And that was the second red flag. He stood there, just speechless. My mom asks who the woman was, and my dad just told her to give him the phone and said it's a former colleague from work. She then told my dad to call the number, and he refused. My mom questions why they're still in contact if it's a former colleague, and I don't remember what my dad said. However, I remember my dad deleting that lady's number off his phone and telling my mom that he did it because my mom kept trying to call the number. Either way, I'm not an expert in body language, but his reaction screamed guilty. I know how my dad reacts if he's been wronged, and he didn't act like that here. He just tried to defuse the situation and make my mother look crazy, like most lawyers do, as if it was helping him in any way. My dad goes off to say that he rarely uses that phone, but yet it was ringing, several times, with a woman on the other line. Some men are so bad at lying. My mom even said that she's seen the same number calling my dad's other phone in the past, but my dad always dismissed it as a work colleague. Ever since then, he's been trying to butter me up and be super nice to me, as if I forgot what happened. I'm so disgusted and broken. Things like this strengthen my idea of never wanting to get married. I just don't believe that men in general are monogamous. It broke me because I always thought my father would never do such thing. People know him as the nice, intelligent guy with the perfect family. He is supposed to drop me off at the airport next week, but I'm contemplating on taking the train there with my luggage instead. I don't think I will ever view him the same way. It's like those movies where a kid finds out that their superhero isn't that crafty after all. I am very overprotective of my family, but I will not side by my father doing my mother wrong, ever. I'm so close to my father, more than my mom, so this is really confusing for me. My mom has been going through a lot. My grandmother has been battling cancer for the past year, and her extended family has turned on her for petty reasons. And to think that my dad and his possible affair being another factor in my mom's pain makes me so angry. My dad knows what she's going through. Why are men like this? Don't get married if you don't see monogamy in the long run. It's that she told me that she can't sleep and wants to get to the bottom of this. She even said she will pull up at his workplace and ask the managers for the ladies' address. That's how angry my mom was. I love my dad, but I don't think I will ever look at him the same again.
I am addicted to food. I suffer a lot. I need help. I've tried to give up, but I fail every time. Hamburgers. Who can give up eating hamburgers, especially with barbecue sauce? I didn't mind this kind of addiction, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me begin by introducing myself. I am Patricia, 15 years old, living with my parents and my brother. I lead a quiet life. No interests, no hobbies, except for eating, that is. Food is my faithful friend. It never leaves me. It is my partner, my soulmate. But having food as your soulmate has insidious side effects. A dark side, if you will. It denies me a healthy life, robs me of the energy to play, and causes me to sleep excessively. I would much rather stay at home with a bag of potato chips than go out and exercise. My soulmate ultimately betrayed me, though, last Thanksgiving at my granny's home. She lives in a state nearby. Granny was a clever doctor and an excellent cook at that. She could conjure up something really delicious. On that day, she had prepared barbecue turkey with nuts and other secret recipe ingredients. The taste was so great, as if it had descended from heaven itself. I felt like I was fighting a food war, and I had to win at all costs. I ate and ate and ate. I don't know why, but I just couldn't control myself. I attacked that turkey like it was the last on the planet. But every culinary war with a worthy adversary, such as the barbecued turkey, has its own unique type of casualties. Suddenly, I found myself unable to breathe. I fell to my knees and passed out. The turkey had won. I woke up later in the hospital, though, still clinging to an unfinished turkey leg. The doctor told me that I was gaining way too much weight. He said that I should be put on a diet. Diet? Man, how I hated that word. It hung over my head like the sword of Damocles. It meant depriving me of my passion, my reason for living. I considered eating vegetables in small amounts to be the worst form of cruel and unusual punishment, the worst form of torture imaginable. Imagine thinking of a wonderful, greasy, cheese-laden pizza with all the toppings, and then suddenly opening your eyes to find a healthy green salad bowl. But I had reached a turning point in life. One day, my brother was playing on the street, while I was sitting at home gazing longingly at a tempting piece of cheesecake, just sitting there, taunting, daring me to eat it. I struggled mightily to resist the urge, but in the end I succumbed and wolfed it down like a starving animal. Shortly afterwards, I began feeling dizzy, but I was unable to call for help this time, and then I passed out again. I was taken to the hospital. While lying in the hospital bed, half conscious, I overheard the doctor say to someone, "She needs to stop eating or it will be the death of her." I thought to myself, whoa, death? So I made up my mind right then, right there. I resolved to fight a new war, a war against my appetite. On our way back home, I told my father that I wanted to see a nutritionist. He was delighted to hear that. Later, at the clinic, the doctor welcomed us in. She told me how to overcome my eating fetish. She gave me a strict diet regimen with a schedule full of healthy meals. I kept telling myself that winning this war was possible. I simply had to be patient and persevere. I stuck to the strict diet and did some physical workouts. My parents supported me wholeheartedly. I was enthusiastic. I can totally do this. A week passed quickly, and I eagerly visited the doctor to receive some good news. When the doctor weighed me and told me that my weight hadn't changed at all, I was crestfallen. She looked at me and asked me, how was this possible? I told her I didn't know, because I was following her diet thoroughly, though it did require a tremendous effort on my part. Another week passed, and again I went to the doctor. The results were the same. She said to me, "Patricia, are you sure you're following the diet I prescribed for you?" I said yes. She sat there wondering. Then she told me with a puzzled look on her face, "It's odd, but your weight is increasing, not decreasing." This unexpected piece of news mystified me. Another week passed. No change. The doctor was nonplussed. I returned home with a dejected look on my face. My father asked me what was wrong. When I told him, he laughed. Do you believe that? My father actually laughed at my predicament. I was furious. He gestured an apology with his hand and then told me that it was my own fault. I was puzzled. What are you talking about? He told me that I had been sleepwalking to the refrigerator every night and eating everything in sight. I was taken aback. I couldn't believe it. "Stop acting like you didn't know it," he said. "You must have been awake." I replied, "No, Father, I'm not acting. I was truly unaware that I've been sleepwalking and eating in my sleep." But now that we've finally solved the mystery of the increasing weight, we returned to the doctor with this new information and told her the situation. She laughed and told me that my discipline had denied my body the food it craved, but my brain had refused to cooperate and had overridden my will by urging me to eat in a subconscious state. She told me not to worry, though, that she could treat that. Armed with this knowledge and her support, and the support of my family, I felt that I could finally win this war.
Emily and I became best friends during junior year of high school. We bonded over a similar love of acting. We were both in the theater program, hung out in the same groups, and had classes together. It just seemed so easy to be best friends. Things got complicated when it was time to move on to college. We didn't go to the same university, but we were still pretty close as friends. We texted a lot about what was happening in our lives, and when I needed advice, she was the first person I talked to. I had a tough time transitioning from high school, where everything seemed to come so easily to me. College was a completely different place for me, and she was the only one I talked to about it. Freshman year, I saw her every other month. She was so close that we could still try and find time to hang out together. I didn't have many friends, so it was easier to give her my free time. I didn't mind, she was my best friend. Sophomore year was the same. Only I had my life in order this time. I wasn't struggling in my classes, but my social life was still the same. I had few friends that I actually hung out with, and I was okay with that because I had her. We talked and texted about everything, and I vented all my worries and frustrations to her. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have survived those first 2 years. I don't really remember what happened last summer before junior year, but I guess that's when I decided I needed to come out of my shell and enjoy my college years. My junior year began and I met new people who I came to really enjoy being around. They lived in the dorms in the same hall as me, so it was so easy to just hang out with them even if it was until 2 a.m. And we had classes early the next day. I gave them more of my time, and I didn't even realize that I had put my relationship on hold with my best friend. I didn't find out until I tried talking to her and she wouldn't respond. I found out later from my sister, who was also good friends with her, that they had talked about how I was ignoring her. She would text and I wouldn't respond. She would try to talk to me and I was too busy. I didn't really remember doing any of that. I had the thought that I was pretty consistent and always responding. I had grown attached to my new friends. They had become basically a part of my everyday life, and I had unconsciously replaced her. The last 2 months of our friendship, I had tried to talk to her and fix things, but it was useless. It was the end of the semester, so we were both stressing over finals and family stuff, so we wouldn't really talk. We finally talked during winter break. I had no excuse for what I had done, and when she called, I told her I never wanted to lose her. Our friendship ended that day. I sat in my room and cried for a while, thinking about the great person I had just lost. I felt guilty for what I had done. I had moved on without telling her, and that's where I messed up. Later that night, I came to a decision that from now on, I wouldn't take friendships so lightly, even if they were long distance. She was a very important part of my life, and I regret letting her go. I hope one day I have the courage to let her know how important she was to me. She did so much for me, even if it was a simple text to see how I was. I still hold hope that one day we can be friends again. That's not the whole story, though. Emily lent her ears to a group of girls, and instead of trying to get me back to my senses, she let someone steal her from me. I was so ready to try to make things up until I heard her side of the story. I just want to give her a giant thank you. And yes, I was bitter. So very bitter when I found out the real reasons as to why my best friend wasn't talking to me as much. I was mad at her and I blamed her for everything. I blamed her for the lost times that I had with her. For the memories, I regretted everything, from the money to the borrowing of clothes to the simple things like helping around the house because it was all nothing but wasted time. I blame you, Emily. I want her back. I want my best friend back in my life and doing things with me such as makeovers, going on trips, double dates, shopping together, things that normal best friends do. But I couldn't because Emily chose to be with other friends. I don't need her. She chose to leave me. She chose not to be my friend after this girl decided to run her mouth and tell little lies. Emily ended our friendship. The other girl only played a part in it. Emily took her in though, and I have to thank her for that. She must not have been a true friend if, in her eyes, she could up and leave with no real reasoning behind it, or an explanation. How can someone just forget that someone in their life once existed? It's cruel to do that to a human being. Human beings are made to feel wanted, which that is not it. And as for the girl who stole my best friend, please make sure you're there for her when she and her boyfriend go through a tough time together. Make sure you're there to talk to her when she's having doubts about college, or even if her family is nagging at her. Make sure you're there for her makeover sessions, shopping sprees, or just movie nights. Hold her when she cries over Beauty and the Beast. Just be the best person you can for her. I know that she needs it more than ever, because that is what she deserves. I really don't think I will ever be over this. She left me over a stupid reason for something you caused. And it's okay. You live and learn. Someone once said, some people may leave, but it's not the end of your story. It's the end of their part in your story. I'm always going to treasure our friendship, even though things weren't just meant to be. Your best friend is your best friend for a reason, and it should not end in the way mine did. Remember all the moments that you had, because one day you may outgrow each other or move on to other things.
He was a dream, the future, or so I thought. But my love was cursed right from the start. Sounds a bit confusing, right? Let me explain. But first, I should probably introduce myself. I'm Carolyn. I was a dreamer. I dreamed of a good, warm, stable, successful life. I wanted a good job. And I wanted to travel around the world a bit with Helen. She was my best friend. We virtually shared the same dreams, and hobbies, and interests, and lifestyles. We've been friends since we were kids. People often thought that we were sisters. I did too, in fact. She even got jealous if anyone tried to get close to me. Every day, Helen and I worked a little more towards our dreams. Once, when Helen and I were traveling with some of our friends, we had a problem with the hostess on the plane. A gentleman intervened and cleverly solved our problems. His name was Danny. I liked him. A lot. I thought about him often. But whenever I talked to Helen about him, she told me that he was not as amazing as I seemed to think he was. Coincidentally, I met him again at a party of a mutual friend. We talked together till daylight. I told Helen about our encounter, and she expressed her wishes that my love story would have a happy ending. I similarly told her that I hoped she would find the love of her life someday too. Everything would be okay, we figured. Then, one day, I received a letter in our mailbox. It was in weird handwriting, as if the writer had written it with a trembling hand. I opened it curiously. It said that my love for Danny would become a curse if I didn't give him up and get him out of my life. What nonsense, I thought. Whose idea of a silly joke was this? I immediately called Danny and Helen to tell them about the letter. Danny laughed, but Helen was worried and suggested that I should be careful from now on. That same day, Danny had a horrible car accident, but fortunately he wasn't hurt. A detective investigating the case determined that his car brakes had been tampered with. In another incident, a car almost hit me, but it swerved away at the last minute. When I mentioned this incident to Danny, he tried to calm me down and told me to just forget about it. He gave me a beautiful bracelet as a present and proposed. We got engaged, and I couldn't have been happier. I wanted to show the bracelet to Helen, but somehow I seemed to have lost it. I couldn't find it anywhere. Anyway, when I told Helen about his proposal, she was thrilled for me. I spent days shopping for just the right wedding dress. I was so busy with preparations that I forgot all about the ominous letter. I went to the wedding hall early to make sure that everything was ready and prepared. Helen was helping me, and Danny kept calling me to make sure I was all right. Suddenly, the lights went out. I called out to Helen, worried that she might have tripped and fallen when the lights were out. When the lights came back on, Helen had fainted, and my dress had disappeared. I screamed to the ceiling, "What do you want from me? Leave me alone!" Suddenly, Danny appeared out of nowhere and asked me what had happened. I told him then and there that we must break off our engagement, otherwise the curse the letter mentioned might injure someone or cause someone to die. Then Helen came too and tried to calm me down. She told me to go to the car and that she would get our stuff and follow me. I loved Danny and wanted to marry him, but now I was seriously worried that this curse threat might actually be real. Helen came back carrying a bag and a large suitcase and told Danny not to worry, that she would drive me home and then call him to tell him that we had arrived safely. I was still crying, and Helen was trying to calm me down. When we arrived home, I noticed something strange. Helen was carrying a bag that was partially open, and I glimpsed a piece of clothing stuffed into it. It looked exactly like my dress. I opened the bag and found that it was my dress. I confronted Helen and demanded to know how my missing dress ended up in her bag. I clearly caught her red-handed, and she was unable to answer coherently. I realized at that moment that the source of the so-called curse was Helen. "Helen," I said, "how dare you do this to me? I thought we were like sisters to each other." She replied icily, with a glare that I saw for the first time. She said that she fell in love with Danny just as I did, but he chose me instead of her, and that she hated me for it. She said she won him over. and got him to love her instead. Then they both tried to scare me into calling off the wedding so that she and Danny could be together. There are no words to describe how I felt at the time. I replied in a similar tone. I told her that I don't ever want to see her again, or Danny. Neither of them mattered anymore. I never did see Helen or Danny after that day. I'm on a Caribbean island now, sipping on a cocktail. I read in the paper that Danny and Helen had announced their engagement. I'm thinking about what wedding present I should give them as a surprise. Why am I covering my face, you ask? Why would I wear a hoodie and cover my face with a veil? Your brain is probably going to go for the obvious. Illness, health issue, ugliness, or maybe an old wrinkled face. But that's not exactly true. Let me take off my hoodie and remove my veil. There, see? I'm actually not that bad. Well, except for those large, smooth, white spots on my face. I have a skin condition called vitiligo. I'm Bella. My name is supposed to mean beautiful. I'm 17 years old, yet people view me as a monster because of my appearance. People shy away from me. They think they can catch whatever it is I have. They fear me, but they have no need to, really. Vitiligo is harmless, nothing more than a skin pigmentation defect. It is not contagious, and it won't rub off you. But society fears those who are different. No one wants to be near me. I have only one friend. Her name is Laura. Before I developed vitiligo, I had a great childhood. I used to laugh, play music and sing, and I had many friends. My parents and my friends enjoyed my singing and thought that I might become a famous singer one day. My hobbies included reading, watching movies, and playing sports. I excelled in gymnastics and even won a few awards. The days passed merrily. Then one day, I mysteriously got a headache and became fatigued, and I noticed a white spot on my body. I showed it to my parents, and they looked worried. They took me to the doctor, who examined me and diagnosed the problem as a skin disorder called vitiligo. My father was concerned and asked the doctor if it was dangerous. She explained to him that it was harmless, just a skin discoloration issue. My mother asked if it was contagious, but the doctor said no, not to worry. It can't and it won't spread to anyone else. I felt like I was in a dream that turned into a nightmare. The doctor tried to reassure me that it was simply a skin disorder, not a disease, and that it could be treated to some extent. It initially spread all over my body from shoulders down, causing me to wear long-sleeved blouses and gloves. Then, one day, the spots appeared on my face. When my friends noticed the spots, I told them about vitiligo, but they didn't believe me when I said it wasn't contagious. They began to avoid me. Even my little siblings seemed to be afraid to hang around me. One of them even called me a monster. I hated myself, hated this affliction, hated my circumstances. It felt like I was all alone in the world, and nothing really mattered anymore. I gave up everything: music, gymnastics, reading. Though my parents encouraged me, I was totally depressed. But as the saying goes, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So I decided to try and make the best out of the hand that life had dealt me. Besides my parents, my friend Laura was the only person who supported me in accepting my condition and moving on with my life. Her support meant a lot to me. Sometimes we would spend hours sitting down without speaking. We felt comfortable and safe in each other's company. One day, Laura told me that she had a surprise for me. I told her that nothing could surprise me, but to go ahead and tell me anyway. She said there was a talent contest on a local channel, and that she signed me up to participate in it. I was shocked. I had long forgotten about singing. Laura enthusiastically told me that I had to get back into the habit of singing again, and that I needed to send them a recording of my singing. Initially, I resolutely refused, but in the end, she finally persuaded me to do it, so I submitted a recording of my singing. Laura was pleasantly surprised. She said my voice was beautiful. I sang a rather sad song, and after finishing it, she hugged me. She told me that the results would be released in 3 days. I waited anxiously, and I hadn't felt that way in a long time. 3 days later, I received a call from Laura. Her voice seemed sad, and I immediately knew that I had been rejected from entering the contest. But then she let her true excitement show, and she shouted in the handset that I had been accepted to participate in the competition. I screamed with joy. My parents heard the commotion and asked me what had happened. When I told them, they were ecstatic. I wanted to change people's minds about vitiligo, so I came up with a plan. The day of the contest arrived. The program would be live. My parents, Laura, and I went to the studio to await my turn. There were a lot of participants, all of whom seemed to have beautiful voices that were much more melodious than mine. Oh, I forgot to tell you that I was wearing my usual hoodie, gloves, and face veil again. I tried to stay calm until my turn, but Laura was talking non-stop, and my parents were encouraging me the whole time. After a while, the host came and told me to get ready, that I was the next act up. I patiently waited for my turn, off the side of the stage, listening to them call the name of the singer that preceded me. The audience and judges had clapped loudly for him. He had sung beautifully. I suddenly felt panic. I thought of running back home, but Laura gently put her hand on my shoulder and quietly told me to believe in myself, just as she believed in me. These words calmed me down. They were all I needed. Then they called my name. I took a deep breath and went out onto the stage. The stage lights were so bright, the audience seemed too many to count. I could see the judges wondering and whispering among themselves about my covered head, hands, and face. One of them asked me to introduce myself, and I did. Another one was overcome by curiosity and asked me why my hands and face were covered, and I replied saying that I had a personal reason for doing so. Then they told me to begin. My heart was racing. It felt like it would burst out of my chest. I froze. I couldn't move my mouth. I looked at Laura and my parents. I heard a member of the audience snidely remarking that I was going to sing silently. Another one remarked, somewhat loudly, that he thought my voice was horrible and that I should get off stage. Several members of the audience began to laugh, but my resolution was firm. I had decided to give it my best shot. I closed my eyes and opened my mouth and began to sing. I sang with all my heart. As I was singing, I was thinking of my past suffering, of the friends who had abandoned me, of all the embarrassing moments. I began to cry. When I finished, I was snapped out of my mental reverie by the sound of loud clapping. I opened my eyes and I was awed to see the audience stand on their feet just to clap for me. The judges were smiling broadly and clapping as well. After a short time, one judge motioned the audience to quiet down. "Your voice touched our hearts," they said, "and we enjoyed every word you sang." I motioned to him that I would like to say something, and he nodded and sat down. I launched into my planned speech. When I first walked out onto the stage, you asked me why I was covering my hands and face. Now that everyone has heard me sing and honored me so kindly with applause, I would like to answer the judge's question. Your accepting and honoring me as a singer has encouraged me to do so. I pulled back my hoodie and removed my gloves and veil. I spoke softly into the mic. My name is Bella, and you can see from my hands and my face that I have a skin condition called vitiligo. Because of my appearance, I have been called a monster. My friends abandoned me because I no longer looked normal to them. People blame me for my illness. This made me hate my life. This skin condition wasn't my choice. My parents and my only friend Laura encouraged me to participate in this competition, though I didn't want to. I was terrified to have to show my face in public, but I chose to come here today and reveal my face to draw attention to the plight of people like me, people who suffer from vitiligo, to show everyone here that I am not a monster, that I am not ill, that I have feelings just like you do. So please, do not be afraid of people like me with the skin disorder. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Then I heard one member of the audience slowly begin to clap, then two, then three, and suddenly the whole hall burst into applause. I looked off stage. My parents and Laura were all crying. The audience began chanting my name. One of the judges came over to me and hugged me and said that from now on, people would call me an angel instead. I must have been crying because my face was all wet. I was finally proud of myself. I had accepted the challenge and won the day. I was most definitely not a monster anymore.
These things could be considered blessings from God, especially if you are very successful in all aspects of your life. You should be very grateful and appreciate all these gifts, because if you take them for granted and then lose them, you will regret it deeply. Believe me, I know. and my story is how I know. My name is Chris. I am 39 years old and am a news presenter for a local TV channel. I grew up in a poor family. My dad was a low-paid laborer, and I had no desire to follow in his footsteps, so I decided to get a job in life as fast as possible to begin earning money early in life. I first worked as a grocery clerk in sales in a packaging plant. After that, I worked at a lot of different jobs, earning money to support my family and my studies. I earned good grades at my university in the Faculty of Mass Communications, so I would have a chance at getting my dream job of being a news presenter. And I succeeded. In my first job as a news presenter for a local TV channel, it was my duty to prepare programs. Being a news presenter had always been a dream of mine. I was young and wanted to be famous and well known as a TV personality. It was not as easy as I thought it would be, but I was finally able to eventually achieve my dream of becoming a famous news presenter. I was able to move my family into a bigger house. I married a girl whom I loved and with whom I had 2 children. My life was moving along smoothly in accordance with my plans in life. But fate doesn't like happy endings, it seems, and my life took a dark turn. Once I became famous, my work took more and more of my time and energy, and the added stress required to maintain that success at work began taking a toll on my personal life. I began losing interest in my family and started ignoring them, and my friends as well. Spending too much time at work caused me to miss important things in my life, like my kids' and my friends' birthdays, my wedding anniversary, time with my parents, and intimate time with my wife. Ignoring my wife and family caused many domestic arguments. These increased over time and began to affect my work. I even began ignoring Mom and Dad, causing my relationship with them to worsen as well. Dad blamed me for seeking luxury and fame at the expense of my family. It was hurtful to hear such criticism from Dad. Eventually, he and Mom decided to leave our new flat and return to the old one. My life was being turned upside down. I became so stressed out and irritable that friction with my wife and my kids caused my wife to threaten to leave me and take the kids with her. We ended up quarreling about this even, and I drove them away as well. Fame had improved my life up to a certain point, but was now destroying my life. As I saw it, I had 2 options. Continue down this path and continue destroying my life, or accept that fate had given me a wake-up call, that I need to rethink my life and change course. Also at this time of deep contemplation, I began getting severe headaches, like migraine headaches that worsened day by day. A friend of mine recommended that I go see a doctor, so I took his advice. I went to a doctor who was quite well known, and he told me that I had a tumor in my brain. Woe is me. Was this downhill trend in my life ever going to stop? I guess not, because then he continued with more bad news. That I just had 30 days to live. I didn't know what to do. First, I called Dad. I knew that he was upset with me, as were my friends, wife, and kids. It seemed that I might be doomed to die alone. I began reminiscing about the good old days, when my nice home was filled with happiness and my children laughing, playing, and shouting. But now, it sat silent and empty. Having only 30 days to live, I felt that I needed to fix my life before it was too late. So I took action. I took a vacation from work and went to visit Mom and Dad. After hugging and talking to them, my eyes were filled with tears. Learning what I had given up in pursuit of success tore at my heartstrings. They asked about my health, and I concealed my condition and told them I was quite well. I apologized for my past bad behavior and promised them that I would change for the better. Dad forgave me because he didn't want to see me so sad and miserable, so I was able to reconcile with both of them. Mom asked about my wife and kids, and upon learning that they had left me, she said that I needed to reconcile with them too. I told her that I would do that I planned to fix everything. So I returned to our old home and was putting some flowers on the doorstep when my wife happened to open the door to find me there. I tearfully asked her to forgive me and to move back into our new home to live with me again. I promised them that making them happy would be my only purpose in life from that point forward. The strange thing is that I not only changed for the better, but I was even better than I was before things had gotten worse. I spent all my time with my parents, my family, and my friends. We met every week to gather fun and barbecue cookout parties. During my spiritual renaissance, my renewed enjoyment of life, my phone kept ringing a lot, but I figured it was just the doctor with more bad news, so I ignored it. Then one day, I gathered all the family together and told them the truth. That I was going to die very soon. It was a major shock to everyone. My wife fainted, and my parents and kids were all crying. Finally, I was ready to answer the numerous phone calls that had been coming in. They were from the lab. The lab technician informed me that they had mixed up my medical records with someone else's, and that person had died within the predicted 30 days. However, I was off the hook. They apologized profusely for their mistake and hung up. I was so ecstatic. If there's really a cloud 9, then I was there. I walked outside and looked up at the clear blue sky with my eyes full of tears, basking in the warmth of the sun and savoring the cool breeze of life teasing at my hair and face. Fate had given me another chance, and I did not intend to waste it the second time around. I would live the rest of my life as if I only had 30 days to live.
My name is Laura, and as a child, I craved unconditional love. But instead of cuddles and family outings, my lasting memories are of bitter rows. My mom never wanted children, she says. She told me that the only reason she didn't get an abortion was that she found about the pregnancy too late. My dad left when I was very young, which made my mother resentful. She had to stay and be the responsible mom, which she hated. On one occasion, my grandparents took me away, and I remember thinking, this is what family should be like. The relationship dissolved completely when I was a teenager. My mom's first love was always men. And when I was 15, she moved to Africa for a boyfriend without telling me. It's something I found impossible to forgive, especially as there has never been an explanation or even an apology. She has contacted me since, but always asking for money. That's why I made the decision to cut all ties with her. I put my mother's behavior down to a horrible upbringing, but she can't make the same excuses for her father. Dad had a lovely childhood, but he has no emotions or empathy for anyone. We haven't spoken in 7 years. Although she's so close to his parents and they encouraged her and her dad to repair the damaged relationship, it brought her nothing but more hurt. After he left my mom, he went on to have a new family. That was really hard for me to handle, when he's made so little effort with me. My issues with my mom and dad have badly affected my mental health all throughout my life. I see a therapist regularly now to try to help me deal with the emotions. When I get married next year, neither of my parents will be invited. I grew up thinking I did something wrong for my parents not to want me. My only regret is not telling my dad how much I hated him. I don't hate my mom. I just feel sorry for her and I wish she could see what she's done. Ending all contact with a parent may sound extreme, but for me, it was an act of self-preservation. My dad left when I was 8, and I haven't spoken to my mom once since I moved to Germany 10 years ago. She wasn't maternal and had a really bad temper, which she took out on me. She would never be affectionate, and I felt unloved. I believe my mother may have had a miserable childhood, which meant she lacked the emotional tools to be a good parent. After I grew up and had my own daughter, our relationship got even worse. My mother never came to see me or her granddaughter, but she did form a close bond with her son's new family. It hurt me that she made an effort to spend time with my brother's children and not mine. Over time, I have come to terms with the fact that she never loved me. I don't hate her or feel sorry for her. I just don't want her in my life anymore. Andy hasn't spoken to Mom for 25 years, after they stopped communicating in his early 20s. For him, the problem was a lack of respect and common values. I grew up in a children should be seen and not heard household, where my parents' opinion was the only right one. We would have dinner in silence, and my parents never encouraged me in my interests or activities. He says he was never praised for his achievements, only criticized for doing wrong things. Whatever I did, it was never good enough. If I did well at something, my dad would always have to prove he was better. The house rules were strict, and he was sent to bed by 10 p.m. every night, even at the age of 16. But instead of sleeping, Andy found himself listening to the radio to escape the boredom. He quickly became interested in current affairs and politics, which gave him a new insight into the world. It made me realize that my parents' views were snobby, sexist, and racist. I was never allowed to voice any opinion that contradicted their views, or I'd be sent to my room. It made me lose respect for them. Andy and I were living in the same house, but we hadn't had a conversation for over a year. I can't say I regretted not making up with him. He was miserable to be around. Several years later, Andy graduated from university and bought a house. I was so proud, but my mom told me it was horrible. She said it looked like a council house and asked why he wanted to live in a slum. As his career advanced, she became more critical and constantly compared him with his half-brother. I was 21 and felt successful, but she was ashamed of everything I did because it didn't fit her snobbish ideals. Eventually, he stopped contacting both my mother and his brother, and has never looked back. It wasn't really a difficult decision to make because we had nothing in common and they didn't accept me or my life choices. Andy understands why some people see this as a surprising decision, but has no interest in sustaining a relationship for the sake of it. I feel like seeing your parents out of duty is wrong. If you have made no effort to build a relationship with your children, I don't think you can expect them to be there. For other families, the rift is a result of the parents' divorce. Like my friend Helen, she lost contact with 2 of her 4 adult children this year, after ending an emotionally abusive relationship with her father. Since they separated in 2011, it's been a slow process of parental alienation. Her son hasn't spoken to her since last year, and her middle daughter is now ghosting her on every channel of communication. She believes her former partner has used the same manipulation tactics on her children as those that destroyed their marriage. Once the kids got older and she developed her own life and interests, her ex became controlling and tried to stop her from doing the things that she liked. During a period of gaslighting that spanned many years, she says he told lies about her behavior to friends and family. Once he told them she was drunk and suicidal and she had gone missing. In reality, she had gone to the supermarket. When she joined a local band, he told everyone she was crazy and that she wanted to run away and become famous. Over time, her husband's side of the story was believed and Helen began feeling alienated from her family. She sadly lost her mom a few years ago, and her dad is a man's man and took her ex's side. The divorce impacted the children big time and damaged them emotionally. Despite making every effort to build bridges with her children, she admits she doesn't know what their father has told them. He has always made an argument before parties and celebrations to prevent her from coming to the event. He also accused her of having an affair, even though she never cheated on him. The relationships with her 2 estranged children became so strained that she wasn't given a chance to discuss what had happened. The only explanation they've ever given her is that she doesn't care about them or that she treats them as little kids. Though losing contact has been an extremely painful experience for both of us, I don't blame anyone. Not me, not my mom, not Helen, and not her children. It's no one's fault. I can very much relate to how Helen's children felt. They're like goldfish swimming in a tank where someone keeps adding a tiny bit of color every day until they start to see things in a completely different way. I would love a chance to reconnect with my mom, but I can't see how it will happen. At the moment, I feel like I'm standing outside and they're inside a glass room. I really miss my mom, my brother, and definitely my dad.
My son killed me. Yes, you read that correctly. I am not a ghost or an evil spirit that needs rescuing. I have a brave heart. My name is Megan, and I hope to inspire you with my story. I lived with my father and my sister Marlene after the death of my mother, who died from an illness. Though I was only 18 years old, I became responsible for taking care of my whole family. I did everything for them, like cooking, cleaning, washing, etc. My father was a great man, and he did his best to make us happy. I supported both my sister and my father. We faced a lot of problems together, illnesses, financial problems, school, and the like. But there came a day when I had to make a life and death decision at my young, tender age. I fell in love, as any girl my age tends to do. My sweetheart turned out to be loved my neighbor, a guy named Dave. We had grown up together, and we shared everything. Love, sadness, jokes. Our dreams had evolved as we grew up too, so we decided to marry. He knew all about my life circumstances, so he chose a flat near my family for me. We had a nice party and celebrated with our families and friends. Every day, he proved himself to be a responsible man. He loved and respected me, and I him. Finishing my studies was one of my dreams, and Dave supported me in every way to achieve it. But my biggest dream was to have a baby. But sometimes life just isn't fair. One day, while cleaning the house, my heart began beating rapidly, and I couldn't breathe well. I was barely able to call out to Dave, who came immediately when he heard me cry for help. I had had this symptom before when I was younger, but I never told my father because I didn't want to worry him. Dave took me to the hospital, where a doctor said I had a serious heart condition. And not only that, I was pregnant too. Pregnancy and a heart condition do not a good combination make. So we had to choose between the baby's life or mine. My father and Dave asked me to abort the baby. Though they tried hard to persuade me, I resolutely refused. I agonized a lot during my pregnancy. My father and Dave were so worried for my safety. My father and Marlene left their flat to live with me. In addition, Dave cut back on his working hours to stay with me. The day came when I went into labor. They took me to the hospital, where the doctor checked me over and pronounced that my condition was so serious that I wouldn't be able to survive the childbirth. My family and I were shocked. I held Dave's hand and told him that I was strong enough to survive this. Dave hugged me, crying tears like a river. I was so afraid, but I did my best to hide that fact. I looked to my protruding belly and said to my baby, "I want you to know that I sacrificed myself for you. You had better grow up to be a great young man. I love you." Then the baby started pushing its way into this world. The scene fades to blackness. The baby is born. Suddenly, a year later, a birthday party is being held. The baby is now 1 year old. A woman is singing with the baby and her family. The woman looks at you and winks. Megan says, "Haha, fooled you. I lived through the childbirth. Sometimes life gives us a second chance, but you have to be willing to accept the risk."
Hello, I'm Dahlia. Naturally, it's every girl or boy's dream to get employed after they graduate and start their practical life. And that's what happened to me. Right after I graduated, I found the perfect job. I was hired as a graphic designer. As you all know, on the first day of work, we want everything to be perfect. We get ready. We arrive there early just to show them that we're diligent and hardworking. So I got everything ready the day before it, just in case. My clothes were ironed, the colors matched, my shoes polished. It was all good. Though it was only 11 p.m. when I went to sleep. Thought I'd get a fresh start in the morning, but I wasn't sleepy at all. I'm used to staying up all night. So I got up and I started watching The Fault in Our Stars. A romantic movie was bound to make me fall asleep. The movie was over after I cried through it, and I didn't feel the tiniest bit sleepy. Anyway, I ended up sleeping at 6 a.m. after a long night, and I was supposed to wake up at 8 because my work started 10. When I opened my eyes, I checked the time. 9:30? Oh no! I flew off my bed, jumped in the shower, got dressed, and ran out the door. I took my car, but there were traffic jams everywhere. It was a half-hour drive to work, and the traffic wasn't moving. I lost all reason, yelling at people hysterically, telling them to move out of the way. Finally, they started moving. Oh, it's not over yet. What better to make things worse than a flat tire on the highway? And not a single person stopping to help. So, for the first time in my life, I'm changing my car's tire. Needless to say that the clothes I prepared for hours were all black and so messed up. But I hurried off to work anyway. I got there at noon. I wasn't really sure if I should go up. I mean, I'm 2 hours late on my first day. I stood there fretting. Is my first day going to be my last? I'm so late and I look like heck. I checked my bag and I found my makeup kit. It was worth a try. I took my bag and I ran to the door, asking where the bathroom was. I tried my best to make it work. I took off my jacket. Well, it was better than before. All I wanted was to go to work looking like a human. I went to the secretary and I told her I was supposed to start today. She went in to tell the manager I had arrived, and that was it. I heard screaming and shouting. Where does she think she is? How dare she show up 2 hours late on her first day of work? She's fired! Where is she? The door opened and he stormed out. So handsome, so elegant. His tie went perfectly with his suit, and he just stood there staring at me. Then quietly he said, "Please, come in." His secretary looked confused. We sat in the office for about 2 hours. Or was it 3? I lost track of time. I started work that day. Turns out he was my neighbor. So we started going to work together, meaning of course I wouldn't have to change the tires again. But my life started changing too, a little at a time, and my work was going great. Ian was a great boss, and I felt like it was the perfect place for me. 4 months later, Ian proposed. I can't tell you how happy I was. We got married and now we have 2 kids, a girl and a boy. We still work together, helping the company grow. My first day at work wasn't the perfect beginning, but it certainly led to the perfect ending. If there's anything I've learned, it's to do your best, even if it seems impossible.
Hey, my name is Anne. It was the summer break before college, and as a graduation kind of celebration and before each and everyone went to a different college, my best friends and I decided to go on a fancy summer vacation to one of the most beautiful places on earth. At least that's what I think, to Hawaii. I was in my room daydreaming about wearing those cool coconut bras while enjoying an exotic juice, maybe even doing a hula dance, and then my best friend Kim called and burst my coconut bubble. She suggested that since we're off to a whole new stage of our lives, we may as well get a complete makeover. I thought she meant we should go shopping or something, but no, she said we should go to the hair salon and get new haircuts and maybe even dye our hair. I admit that I was overly excited about the whole thing, so I said yes. My normal hairdresser was on annual leave. She has always cut my hair exactly how I describe it. I love her. However, she has been gone for a while, and we couldn't wait any longer for a haircut, so I made an appointment with another hairdresser at the same salon. On a side note, Kim is blonde, while I'm a brunette. I know this info might not sound useful, but it will come in handy throughout the story. Kim and I drove to the hair salon. The place looked extra fancy, the kind of place you would trust. We went inside all giggly like we were 12. We were actually 18 at the time. Anyways, we were greeted by a really nice lady. That lady said that Kim should get highlights and I should go for the same, plus going blonde. I was skeptic, but who cares? It's summertime. The lady put bleach all over my head and went to do Kim's hair. So, after 15 minutes, my scalp started burning like crazy. So I called the nice lady and she said it was time to wash the bleach. As she was washing my head, her smiley face went poker. Chunks of my now orange hair were all over the sink. Kim looked at me and her eyes got as big as my head. The lady asked me not to freak out and that she could cover the bald spots with a really short haircut. So I showed her a picture of exactly how I wanted to look like. And so she started cutting my hair. So far, so good. Then she snips a huge section out of the front of my hair, saying that she was framing my face. At this point, it was too late to say anything. The haircut was just hideous. Not me at all, and especially not what I asked for. So I told her that I hated it. She felt really bad, and I started to tear up because it was seriously so ugly. And now that I was stuck with a really bad haircut, I tried to calm myself that maybe the color will turn out okay. And then she put the dye on my hair, and it turned my hair green. The only solution now was to become a redhead, and that was just a no for me. I don't have the complexion of a redhead. Our boyfriends were actually going to pick us up from the salon, and just imagining the look on Nick's face made me cry and laugh at the same time. Rachel played it really cool, and even her highlights did not go so well. But that incident was just one of a kind. I ended up with the weirdest hair color ever. It was like I was half mermaid, half dragon. This did not stop us from enjoying our summer break, though. It was actually a good source of jokes for a long, long time.
Could you live with yourself if you found out your whole life turned out to be a lie? That you are not who you thought you were? My story may strike you as a silly Hollywood drama, but every word of it is true, I swear. My name is Tasha, and I am 19 years old. I'm in the 12th grade, and I live with my family in a posh mansion. I was an only child, so my parents spoiled me by giving me everything I could ask for. Love, protection, the finest education, material things. My father always worried for my safety. He was so protective that it annoyed me, though I loved him for it. I lived the life that every teenager could only dream about. I had a car, money, and the ability to travel the world if I so desired. The only strain on my existence, as it were, was when I discovered a secret about my life, which is what this story is about. It was the first day of a new school year. The school day was over, and I was walking home with my friends when I noticed a woman standing across the street. She was watching me closely, as if she knew me. Perhaps I resembled one of her friends or relatives. This situation repeated itself on many occasions. Her stalking of me made me feel uneasy, even though she didn't look threatening in the least. So one day, I decided to exit out of the back side of the school instead of the front side. Then I peeked around the corner of the school building to observe her. She was scanning the exiting students carefully, one by one. She looked annoyed that she couldn't find me. Then I sneaked around behind her and tapped her on the shoulder. When she turned around and saw me, her face lit up with joy. I told her that I had seen her watching me every day and asked her why she was doing so. It seemed that she wanted to burst into a lengthy conversation, but instead she stopped herself and calmly handed me a letter. Then she began crying and left me quickly. I resisted opening the letter until I got home, sat down, and got comfortable. Then I proceeded to open the letter. It contained a calendar date and a simple note. Research this date and you will know everything. I browsed the internet for events that happened on that date. There were many hits. One hit was a news article about a woman who had killed her husband. Her husband had been constantly abusing her and her baby girl, so the woman had sold her daughter to a rich man to protect her life. When her husband discovered what she had done, he began beating her severely, and in self-defense, she killed him. I was shocked to read that the rich man she had sold the baby to was none other than my dad. I felt like I was in an Asian Indian movie. I'm in a quandary as to what I should do. Do you have any suggestions? Any advice? Please.